Brock Lesnar. You just shoved that cop aside. 1,000 years ago, the only way you saw a guy like...
If you come at the king, you best not miss.
Acknowledge us.
Hey, guys, we are here at both Red Carpet Ring and Toss Ring Scandal. We're here to continue on of part 2 of this great audio book. And we are talking about Death Clutch, My Story of Determination, Domination, and Survival by Brock Lesnar. Part 2 of this book. We are talking about this here. You guys get the likes of as we come into the ring and in the locker room. Because like I said, there's definitely some dirty laundry to be aired. That will soon come before you know it. But we already went over part 1 before prior. We went over part 1 of Brock Lesnar's early career when he started wrestling college, his early struggles. Then he made his way to WWE, becoming the WWE Champion within 5 months. And now we're going to the second part of his career where he is at the tail end of his first WWE run. And then also his life after WWE, football, NFL, UFC, then making this in New Japan as well, and then working his way back up to WWE. So let's get into it, guys. Get the likes of as you come in, and let's get into it. And I hope you guys enjoy this audio book because it is a great book, published in 2011. And with that being said, let's get into it.
Brock versus Rock in Miami. I was so excited the day I heard that I had been booked against Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson in Miami for a second one-on-one match, and if we were including the triple threat match with Triple H in Australia, our third match overall. It ended up being one of the most important days in my pro wrestling career because that match in Miami was a pivotal point in my decision to quit WWE. Before that first SummerSlam, the company flew me down to Miami so Dwayne and I could work out the high points and the finish of our upcoming match. It was Dwayne's daughter's first birthday, and he invited me to stay in his home with him and his family. Dwayne's dad was a journeyman wrestler named Rocky Johnson, so he knew how to play the pro wrestling game as good as anyone. Just like Kurt Hennig, Dwayne was born into the business. The second-generation wrestlers and even third-generation wrestlers like Randy Orton understand the business a lot better than guys who break in from other walks of life because they grew up around it. Dwayne, Kurt, and Randy all saw what the business was about and the sacrifices a family has to make. They also learned the psychology behind the scenes because they were exposed to it from day one. That's a tremendous advantage for them because it might as well be in their blood. I wasn't born into the business. So unlike Dwayne and the others, I had to learn the hard way about a lot of things. If someone from the company would have called me and said, "Hey Brock, would you mind doing a job for The Rock this weekend in Miami?" it wouldn't have been a big deal to me. I owed him that much. I liked Dwayne, and I learned a lot from him that week before he put me over for the championship. But the way everything was handled in Miami really opened my eyes to the wrestling business, and the night of my big match with Dwayne is a day that I will never forget. I showed up at the arena and was met by Jack Lanza, the road agent in charge of the show. As the road agent, Jack would get the finishes on the phone or via email from Vince or JR or Laurinaitis. He would then produce the live event and report back to the bosses on how the show went, who performed well, and who didn't. I'd been up and down the road with Jack a few times, so this day shouldn't have been any different from any other. I figured when the time was right, we would all sit down and Jack would tell us how Vince wanted the match to end. No reason to believe this show was any different from all the others, except I was working with Dwayne, and that was pretty special for the both of us. Then I realized something ain't right here. The show had already started, and Jack hadn't given us a finish yet. Dwayne and I started talking about our match. and I kept thinking, okay, but what's the finish here? It was about an hour and a half before we were supposed to step into the ring for the main event of the evening, and Dwayne says to me, "And that's when I'll hit you with the rock bottom. 1, 2, 3. I actually laughed because I thought Dwayne was ribbing me. I was the WWE Champion, the Golden Boy. It was my time to be on top. I was supposed to win. And here's The Rock, who should know better, saying he's going to pin the WWE Champion with the rock bottom. That was funny. Dwayne had this nervous look on his face, and he wasn't laughing with me. He just put all the heat on Vince right away and said, "I can't believe Vince didn't tell you. Didn't he call you about this?" Dwayne made it seem like he thought I knew he was supposed to beat me, and that he was shocked I didn't. "I told you about things like this," Dwayne said. "A lot of shit falls through the cracks. You gotta stay on top of Vince about everything." I remember the week I stayed with Dwayne. He was on the phone with Vince constantly. It was the right way to handle his business. Dwayne had a hand in everything they did with his character. He was a big enough star that he had some say in how his character was used and how Vince would market and promote him. Even back then, Dwayne would tell me, "Now that you're going to be on top, you need to stay on top of everything all the time." So I went to Lanza and said, "Jack, tell me what the fuck is going on here. I'm the WWE Champion, and I'm losing tonight? Why didn't anyone tell me?" Jack's only response was, "Well, it's a non-title match." What the hell did that mean? I never knew that my title wasn't on the line that night. I never knew that I was supposed to lose to The Rock. "It's Miami," Jack said. "No one will ever know." I can remember hearing Jack say that like it was yesterday. I wasn't upset about losing. That wasn't the point at all. What bothered me was that I was the last guy to know, when I should have been the first. No one had the guts to tell me the truth until it was time to step into the ring. Just from the look on Dwayne's face and the tone in Jack's voice, I knew they were in on something I wasn't. It was obvious to me that Vince, Dwayne, and Jack were all in cahoots, and I wasn't being smartened up to the situation until the very last minute. That night changed my attitude toward the WWE, because it's when I started to feel Vince was a manipulating bastard and that I was being played. I thought it was a stupid decision to have the WWE Champion to lose in a non-title match, but that was something I was going to have to accept. As someone who fights for real, it made no sense to me for the champion to lose and still be the champion. If someone can beat the champ, then they deserve the title. It's that simple. What good is a non-title match? Why would anyone ever want to see that? People pay to see the champion. Who wants to see that? People pay to see the champion because he's the champion and his position as number one is on the line. I didn't like it. I'd been pulling the company plow, been filling the arenas and selling the pay-per-views, and no one even tells me that Dwayne wants to get his loss back. No one has the balls to just say, "Brock, this is the way it is." Vince can't tell me the angle, the story, and why it makes sense for me to lay down for The Rock in a non-title match. He doesn't want my 2 cents worth? I'm the damn poster boy for this company, and I'm the only one who doesn't know what's going on? As I thought about it, I kept thinking that Vince was really screwing with me, and that there was a lot more behind keeping me in the dark than just Dwayne wanting to get his loss back after a year and a half. Did I do something to piss Vince off? Did he need to show that he could keep me in my place? Something was going on. I'll be the first one to admit that I'm a control freak. When it comes to business, I want to know what's going on, when, where, and why. This is my living. If I have to lose for the good of the company, I will. But it'll be on my terms. I thought I had a good relationship with Vince. But obviously, I was wrong. When it came to my business with the WWE, the one person I thought I could trust was Vince. When I first started, we had that handshake, and I put my future in his hands. He ran the company. He controlled everything. I knew that if I couldn't count on him to tell it to me straight, I was screwed. I could play the game with everybody else on the roster and in the office, but I couldn't play games with the owner of the company. That's a fight I'm going to lose every time because he writes the checks. He makes all the rules. If I'm Vince's top guy, the guy he's relying on, his go-to guy, his main event, why would he lie to me? Why would he play this kind of game with me in Miami for no reason? Just to fuck with my head? Just to do it for the sake of doing it? To Vince, it may have been just another day in the wrestling business, but to me, it was a lot more than that. That day was the first in a chain of events that led to my departure from the WWE. The wheels were spinning in my head about getting screwed over in Miami, when Vince tells me he wants me to lose the WWE title to Eddie Guerrero. Of course, Vince put his own twist on it. Goldberg's going to interfere, give the win to Eddie, and that'll set up this huge match at WrestleMania between the two of you. Lesnar versus Goldberg is so big, it will sell itself. You don't need the WWE title involved. Of course, Vince kept telling me how good it would be for my character to drop the title to Eddie and then take on Goldberg. You can beat Goldberg in 30 seconds. He's leaving, so I don't care. We can get Austin involved, and it's going to be the biggest match on the card. WrestleMania 20, Madison Square Garden. Brock Lesnar versus Bill Goldberg, and Stone Cold Steve Austin will be out there as the special guest referee. It's big box office, it's pure money. I knew what this was about. Vince was selling me hard on WrestleMania because he wanted to get the title on Eddie Guerrero. Vince kept telling me how the Latino audience was growing, and this was the right move for business. But after what happened in Miami, our relationship had already gone south. I never believed another word that came out of Vince's mouth. I no longer had any faith whatsoever in the Federation. But Vince isn't the only one that screwed me. Leaving WWE. I was getting angrier and angrier. I couldn't get any time off. My body was hurting. I was going through a lot of personal drama. I was pissed off about the way things went down in Miami, and I certainly wasn't happy about being replaced by Eddie Guerrero as WWE Champion. I remembered how every step up the ladder was worth more money to me, and now I'm looking at going back down that ladder? I don't talk to a lot of people nowadays, and it was the same story during my time in WWE. I didn't like how untrustworthy so many of the boys were, but I thought there were a few people I could count on. Kurt Angle was supposed to be one of those people. Then something happened that changed my opinion on Kurt. I had many conversations with Kurt, but I soon found out those conversations didn't remain strictly between us. It's unfortunate. I had to learn that lesson the hard way. I knew that at any given moment, anybody in that locker room would stab you in the back if they could get away with it. They all wanted a better place on the card. Everyone wanted to make more money, to have the best matches, get the biggest push. It's no secret in the pro wrestling business that you have to watch your back at all times. Everyone is put in the position to double-cross the other guy to get ahead. Sometimes, they want to see if you're willing to be that ruthless, because Vince likes to see his top guys fight for the #1 position. Kurt and I should have had a bond. We both rose to the top in amateur wrestling. We were both real athletes, true competitors. What I didn't realize at the time is that Kurt resented me for getting to the top of the pro wrestling world faster than he did, and for making more money. Kurt wanted the same push I was getting. I looked at Kurt as a comrade. He just wanted what I had. Vince never looked at Kurt the way he looked at me. Kurt had that Olympic gold medal, which is nothing to sneeze at, but Vince and Triple H didn't see an Olympic champion. They only saw a 5'9" guy in tights. In their minds, fans pay to see the huge guys perform. Kurt could never be bigger than life. It didn't matter how good he was in the ring. Kurt just wasn't tall enough or big enough to be Vince McMahon's top guy for any length of time. Believing I could trust Kurt, I told him I was thinking of getting out of the business. I didn't tell anyone else, and he said he wouldn't either. But soon after I confided in him, I became convinced that Vince knew I was planning to leave. Did Kurt stooge me out? At the time, Kurt and I were traveling together, and I was already thinking something was up with him just from the way he was acting. Then one day, I went out to move the rental car and saw Kurt's cell phone on the seat next to me. I opened it up, and the last call made was to Vince McMahon. Does that prove anything? Maybe, maybe not. But from that day forward, I kept my mouth shut and didn't say anything to Kurt that I didn't want anyone else to know. I dropped the WWE title to Eddie Guerrero at the Cow Palace in San Francisco. The whole storyline was centered on Bill Goldberg getting into the ring and giving me a spear. I didn't believe Vince wanted the title on Eddie Guerrero because he thought Eddie would draw more money than I could, or that Vince had this vision in his head about me versus Goldberg at WrestleMania. I suspected Vince made the decision to take the title off me because Kurt had told him I was thinking about leaving. I started to concentrate on just getting through WrestleMania and getting my hands on that nice payday before getting out. You know, it never works out that way, of course, because just as I was getting my head into survival mode, WWE pulled another bullshit move on me. We were scheduled to go to South Africa, and that's just a miserable trip. It's on the other side of the world, the food sucks, it's a long trip to get there, and a long trip back. There's nothing good about it, except you can make some good money when you're in the main event. I was scheduled to wrestle in those main events against Kurt and Eddie in triple threat matches for all 4 South Africa shows. But right before we left the United States, the WWE changed the main events to just Kurt versus Eddie. I was told the 2 of them needed to get their match down for WrestleMania, which meant I was stuck wrestling Bob Holly, who I had just beat in 4 minutes at the Royal Rumble. I like Bob. He's a good guy, and he takes his shit seriously. But I didn't want to work with him. Nothing against him, but wrestling Bob Holly wasn't worth anything to me. We had the match in 2002 when he broke his neck, but not one fan cared when they brought him back. We did our match at the Royal Rumble, and that should have been the end of our storyline. But now I have to travel all the way to South fucking Africa to work with Bob Holly? Could anyone please tell me why? I knew no one would pay to see that match. Since I'm not really needed, give me some time off. I really needed the break by this time. But John Laurinaitis told me how much I'm needed on the card. Against Bob Holly? Are you shitting me? I knew the truth. I was just on the card, taking up space. That's not where I wanted to be. It's never where I wanted to be. Even today, at this very moment, I'm still pissed at myself for getting on the plane to South Africa. I should have just walked. The trip sucked all around, the money wasn't worth the time and aggravation, and I drank all the way back to the United States. I spent 54 miserable hours on an airplane that trip. When we landed at JFK Airport in New York, we got herded like cattle onto a bus over to LaGuardia Airport, where we were supposed to get on another plane and head to Atlanta. Once we get to Atlanta, we're supposed to take this little puddle jumper to Savannah. Once the crew would get to Savannah, it's back to the same old monotonous daily grind again. Get your bags, grab a rental car, find a gym. Look for something to eat, hope for some sleep, because you have to be ready the next morning to spend your whole day taping TV. That's when I snapped. Nathan Jones had lost his mind a month earlier, and he was just minutes away from wrestling in his hometown in Australia. But the weird thing is that when Nathan snapped, I kept thinking that everything he was saying made sense. Nothing is worth this stress. It's all games, but when they don't tell you how seriously they take their own business, I just don't want to be here anymore. So we land at JFK and get bussed over to LaGuardia, and that's when I started drinking again. I was sitting at the airport bar, and I decided right then and there that I wasn't going to get on yet another airplane and go all the way to Savannah. Why? So I could wrestle Bob Holly again? I had no idea what they had in store for me at the TV taping, and I didn't care. I had enough. This was it. The end of the line. I was going home. I got up from the bar, walked through the airport to the ticket desk, and bought my own plane ticket to Minneapolis. When I got on the plane headed home, I ordered another drink to celebrate, but they cut me off. I wasn't happy about being refused alcohol, and I almost caused a major scene that could have turned out really ugly. Not a smart move on my part, but when your head is all full with this other nonsense. Lucky for me, I wasn't kicked off the plane, and I made it home. Those poor flight attendants. They could have blown the whistle on me, but they didn't. I guess this is my chance to say, I'm sorry in a pretty public way to them, and thanks for not making a bad day a whole lot worse. I had it in my head that I wasn't going to do the TV taping in Savannah. In fact, I was going to pull a Steve Austin. I was home, and I wasn't leaving again. Not to go back on the road. No fucking way. This is where I can say I really understood what Austin was thinking that day he walked out, and why I never took it personally. When Steve walked out, it wasn't about working with me. It was about everything but me. I didn't want to leave because of Eddie Guerrero, or Bob Holly, or anyone else. I just had to get out. I had lost my faith, which happened because I had no family after being on the road 300 days a year, and all I had was the Federation. How could I provide a nice life for my daughter if she never got a chance to see me? And what kind of financial rewards could I earn if I'm slowly being worked back down the ladder? I was finally thinking clearly. Or so I thought. I don't know why I got on my plane the next morning and flew to Savannah, but I did. I think Reena talked me into it. Go to Savannah, settle up face-to-face with Vince, handle your business the right way. I love that woman. When I showed up at the building in Savannah, the producer told me I was supposed to go 9 minutes on TV with Bob Holly. I blew a gasket. I went straight to Jerry Briscoe and told him, "You recruited me, so I want you to know I'm leaving. I'm out of here." I wanted to tell Vince to his face too. I had dropped the title to Eddie Guerrero so WWE could draw with the Latino market, and my match with Goldberg at WrestleMania is supposed to be so big the title isn't needed to sell it? I'm supposed to crush Bill Goldberg at Mania in 30 seconds, but I can't get through Bob Holly in 9 minutes? I remember watching Briscoe look for Vince, and I was just boiling. Vince was in the ring with Triple H, so I just walked up to him and said, "We need to chat." Knowing he had a powder keg to deal with, but not understanding how serious I was, Vince made me wait a few minutes. I was only getting hotter and hotter, so I interrupted his conversation and told him we needed to sit down and talk immediately. We went into his office, and I told Vince I was done, going home. I had no desire to wrestle Bob Holly on TV, didn't want to wrestle that night period, and just wanted to leave. Vince said, "Well, Brock, what about WrestleMania? You can't leave on bad terms that way." I'll never forget his next line. "You can't do this to me." All I could think of was, "Do this to you?" I didn't know what Vince thought I was doing to him, but whatever was going on was something I no longer wanted any part of. I agreed to stay on through WrestleMania, but only because I wanted that payday for my match with Goldberg. I trimmed down my match on TV with Bob Holly to a few minutes, wrestled that night, got showered and dressed, and jumped back on my plane. Reena rode home on my plane with me, and I felt relieved. I was going to leave the company. Stupid me. I let Vince talk me into dragging it out all the way to WrestleMania. But if I didn't agree to that, they probably wouldn't have paid me a lot of money they owed me already. So financially, it was smart to agree to stay through Mania. I know Vince was pissed off. In his universe, I was ungrateful. I had turned around and spit in his face. But it's not like he shouldn't have seen it coming. How many times did I tell him I needed time off? How many times did I tell him I wasn't happy with the life or what it was doing to me? Vince always had his stock reply. "Brock, you're so much tougher than that." But it wasn't about being tough. It was about having a life. A year or two bouncing around town to town, bar to bar, girl to girl, Vicodin to Vicodin, vodka bottle to vodka bottle is not a life. I love being in the ring and performing, bringing people to their feet, getting people to hate my character, entertaining the fans. I had a great time doing all of that, especially when I got to work with people I liked. But I wanted to have a family too, and I knew there was no way to do that with the schedule I worked. I don't hate professional wrestling, and I certainly don't hate the people in it. Life on the road is just not for me. It's not the life I choose to live. When the time came, I made my announcement and told everyone I was leaving the WWE. From that day forward, I became the outcast. None of the guys wanted to be seen with me because I was the bad apple. I was turning my back on the wrestling business, their life. I was leaving. I was jumping off the train. They couldn't understand it. Because that train was the only ride most of these guys would ever know. I didn't care, because I had made my choice. I still walked around like I owned the place, because there wasn't one guy in that company who could even hold my jockstrap. If I wanted to shoot on anyone in that locker room at any time, there wasn't a thing anyone could have done about it. I could have stretched every single one of them out. But that's not what the business is about. So I tried to be good about it, be a professional, do my job, earn my check, be a provider for my family. My daughter Maya changed my life. I wanted to be there for her, wanted to watch her grow up. So many of these guys, with their multiple ex-wives and broken up families in different states, missed everything that's really important in life. I didn't want that, and I didn't want that for my daughter either. She deserves a real father. Don't get me wrong, there were a lot of good things about working for WWE. I made a lot of money, even though I spent quite a bit of it trying to get out of my contract. I became famous, which did help me when I wanted a chance in the UFC. I learned about promotion and marketing. But the best thing was meeting my wife. If I hadn't been in WWE, I wouldn't have met Reena. She's given me 2 healthy sons, and she's been wonderful with Maya. When I say I'm a man who has been blessed by God, I mean it. Reena stood by my decision to leave WWE, which wasn't easy for her because she was still with the company at the time. But she could tell there was no way I was going to stay any longer. Besides the lifestyle and all the bullshit, I wanted to compete and get back into athletics again. I thought maybe I would give pro football a try. But in my desperation to get out of WWE, I made the biggest mistake of my life. I signed a release that included a non-compete clause. Vince was pissed at me because we had just done the new deal in July 2003, and he claimed it was the best deal he ever gave any wrestler. But by then, I didn't care about the money or the contract. I had money, and I just wanted to be done with Vince. At the time, I didn't know I was going to pursue a career in mixed martial arts or try to get into UFC. I had no idea I was going to wrestle in Japan. I thought I was headed into the NFL. But that wasn't the main thing on my mind. All I could think about was getting away from Vince and escaping the WWE lifestyle. Everything else was secondary. Vince finally said he would let me go, but he wanted me to sign a release agreement. This time, I thought it would probably be a good idea to have my lawyer look at the document before I signed it. I was sitting in a hotel somewhere when I got the release from Vince, and I faxed it to my lawyer in Minneapolis. He called me, said he would look at it, and then would fax back a marked-up copy to discuss with me. But I got impatient. I just wanted out. I never intended to compete with Vince in WWE, and I didn't care if Vince's agreement said I couldn't. So before my attorney even had a chance to comment, I signed Vince's release. I thought it would be quick and easy. I would get my WrestleMania payday, and I'd be done with pro wrestling forever. I couldn't have been more wrong. What I didn't know, because I didn't wait to hear back from my lawyer, is that while my WWE contract had a 1-year non-compete clause, the release I signed was much different. Just to avoid the hassles of lawyers negotiating and everything that happens when you're leaving, I signed a release that stated I couldn't appear for any wrestling, Ultimate Fighting, or sports entertainment companies anywhere in the world until mid-2010. With one stroke of the pen, I royally screwed myself over. And went from not being able to wrestle in TNA, Vince's only televised U.S. competitor, for a year, to not being able to wrestle, fight, or do anything in sports entertainment worldwide for almost 6 years. I had just turned 27 years old. If I didn't fight that non-compete clause, I would have been forced to stay out of work until I was 33, which happens to be my age at the time I'm writing this book. Everything I've accomplished since that final match at Madison Square Garden with Bill Goldberg would never have happened. The prime of my career would have been spent sitting on the bench. I guess the old expression, you live and you learn, applies here. It cost me nearly a year and over $1 million to fight that non-compete clause. But that was many millions ago, and I won my freedom. I have my family. I love my life. I don't walk around thinking about it. It's the past. That part of my life is over. Closure. It's fitting that my last match in WWE was against Bill Goldberg, and the referee was Steve Austin, because Bill and Steve are two guys I really like. It's a shame that I didn't get to know either one of them very well until after we all got out of the business. Steve's a good guy. If I ever go back for just one match, I want it to be against Stone Cold Steve Austin. I thought Steve was going to be a WWE lifer, but he surprised me and everyone else. I don't have any regrets about my time in WWE, and I certainly don't have any regrets about leaving. But I sometimes wish that Steve and I had one match during the time our paths crossed. That would have been interesting, because his character and my character would have been natural enemies. That makes for great box office. Steve had this rough edge to him, a no bullshit kind of guy. He was also a lot more into the politics than I was. I was always so black and white on every issue, but Steve could always find some gray. Steve and I could have drawn a lot of money against each other. That would have been something special. Who knows? Maybe one day we'll do it. I had no problem laying down for Bill Goldberg for my final match, even though I had been told I was set up to squash him in 30 seconds. I guess they were more pissed at me for leaving than they were pissed at Bill for doing the same thing. Bill wasn't Vince's guy. To Vince, Bill was a WCW creation, a carpetbagger. So Bill got to spear me and beat me at WrestleMania. But no one in the Garden cared. They were too busy booing us both out of the building because they knew we were leaving. The best part of the match was Austin stunning us. Bill's my kind of guy. Neither of us wanted to be in the ring that last night. We just wanted to collect our checks and be done. It wouldn't have mattered if we had been buddies and hung out together in WWE. Because you're so numb there anyway, you have to take everything with a grain of salt. It's better that we got to know each other away from there, because that's when we both realized we could have a friendship. In WWE, we were just two big, miserable motherfuckers. Once we were both outside of the company, we realized we had a lot in common. Bill is a straight-up guy who got in to get out. I respect that. He wants to do a job he enjoys. You know that Bill could be sitting in the TNA locker room right now, milking every paycheck he can get out of them, just like the other so-called legends. But that's not Bill. He wanted to play with his son, work on his cars, and do a few TV spots for cash. Bill was the ringside commentator for my first MMA fight, and we've been good friends ever since. It's funny that we were both seek and destroy behemoths in pro wrestling and wrapped it up together at WrestleMania. I never spent any time with Bill before that last day, but because he was so cool, I was open to us becoming friends once we got out. So I did WrestleMania, and I went home in March 2004, no longer a champion and no longer a pro wrestler. I was about to try my hand at the NFL. Part 3. The Sword at My Throat. My brief NFL experience. After getting out of WWE in the spring of 2004, I started chasing after a career in the NFL. But it didn't matter what sport I was going after. I was escaping the WWE lifestyle. The NFL made sense to me. It was legitimate competition, and I wanted to compete. I went shopping for a football agent, and the first guy I called was a guy by the name of Mike Morris, who was a long-time long snapper for the Minnesota Vikings. Back when I was wrestling for the Gophers, I met Mike through the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. I was invited out to his Milo gym to lift some weights. That gym got a lot of notoriety because Mike would talk about it all the time on K-Fan Radio in Minneapolis. In case you're wondering, Milo stands for Mike's Insane Lifting Order. Mike Morris and I hit it off pretty good because we were both guys who just loved to crank up the music in the gym and do squats until we were bleeding out of our noses. My weight training routine at the University of Minnesota was my own program, and I started training with Mike in between my junior and senior year. I looked up to Mike because he was successful, had a good family, nice kids, nice wife, a very decent life. The Milo gym was in Mike's basement. His whole basement was a gym. Since I knew Mike, he knew he could be honest with me. In that first phone call, he couldn't believe I was getting out of WWE. "You must be nuts," he said. "You want to walk away from a sure thing, guaranteed millions of dollars for 10 years, so you can go after something that maybe has a 5% chance for you to make the transition? You haven't played football since high school." I appreciated his honesty. I told Mike I was serious. I had jumped off the train and I was done with WWE. I wanted to pursue this goal, and I was going to give it my all. Mike accepted everything I told him, and told me he would be 100% behind me. He proved that to be a truthful statement, because he immediately got on the phone with Ed Hitchcock, who used to represent a few NBA players and a few NFL players, but was now kind of out of the mix. Ed was a Minnesota boy, a University of Minnesota grad, and I liked him, so we went to work right away. Ed put this game plan together. "You gotta get in football shape," he told me, "so we need to get you down to Arizona as soon as possible. There's a facility down there called Athletes Performance, where all of the top NFL players and top athletes from all over the world go." I took Ed's advice and headed south. When I got down there, one of the first guys I met was a Midwestern boy named Luke Richardson. He grew up on the Kansas-Missouri border and was one of the trainers. Luke did a little wrestling and had played some college football, but he just lacked size. Luke more than made up for that, though, because he was a stick of dynamite. Today, Luke is the head strength coach for the Jacksonville Jaguars, and he's also my strength and conditioning coach. I consider Luke one of the vital members of Team Death Clutch. When I got down to Phoenix, I stayed at the Marriott for a little while, but that got old fast. It was like being in the wrestling business that I had just escaped, sleeping in a hotel every night. So I rented a condo and started getting my head into the game. I got up every day, ate breakfast, and put everything I had into Luke's conditioning program. My whole life was about working out. In the meantime, Reena was still on the road with WWE, and she was flying into Phoenix to be with me. I didn't like the fact that she was in that environment anymore. I already knew she was the woman that I wanted to be with for the rest of my life, but she wasn't ready to let go of her career yet. I guess I can't really blame Reena for not walking out when I did. We weren't married. I had just made myself unemployed, and the odds of a guy who never played college football making an NFL roster were not good. But none of that stopped me from trying to get her to quit. I hated it when Reena was on the road. There's a lot of testosterone in the business, and I was worried about what some jackass might do or say to her. But Reena is a remarkable woman, and she can take care of herself. She did finally leave the WWE, but not because they were treating her wrong or anything like that. She didn't do it because they disrespected her. She left for me. My wife is an amazing woman. Training for a football career I didn't yet have was a little weird for me. My whole life was in limbo, but everything was looking good. I was getting in football shape, and my workout numbers were off the charts for speed, strength, and agility. In head-to-head tests, I was blowing NFL players away, and I was getting noticed. I was right on track for my pro day, where teams were scheduled to come in and watch me work out. I planned to finish my 6-week program, do my pro day, then fly home and see my daughter. Everything was going great until April 19th, 2004. I'd left my motorcycle in my buddy Crazy's custom bike shop in Minneapolis. It was a Harley chopper, and he was tricking it out and making it into one badass bike. I was getting it all beefed up. I must have put $70,000 into that machine. When I got home, it started out to be a great day. Maya was with me, and I was playing with her on the couch. My old college roommate, Jesse Sabat, and his brother were visiting, and my brother was staying in my basement. I liked having all these good people around me. Then I decided to go pick up my bike and see what Crazy had done to it. I was blown away. I was the king of the road on that thing. I ripped out of Crazy's parking lot on the edge of downtown Minneapolis and headed home. My whole agenda for the weekend was to relax, recover from the training week, and spend time with Maya. Another Nice bike ride on a beautiful day seemed like the perfect prescription for me. Jesse and his brother, my brother, and the rest of the crew had all come down to see the bike, and they were following me home. When I was showing off as we left the parking lot, the rear tire kicked out on me, and I realized this bike had some serious juice to it. I'll admit it, I blew through the next stoplight and saw the one after that turning red to green as I sped down the street. Up ahead I see this car, and it looked like it was going straight, and there was a van ahead of the car pulling over into the turn lane in front of me. I planned to get behind the van and make the same turn, but then, all of a sudden, this dumb bitch who almost killed me decided she was going to cut me off and beat me to the turn, which left me nowhere to go. She was right beside me and moving closer. The van was in front of me, blocking the turn lane. There was traffic coming toward me from the other direction, and there was traffic behind me. I had nowhere to go, and when I hit the brakes, it didn't do much good. It all seemed like it was happening in slow motion. I was going 45 and a 25. By the time I hit the van, I had only slowed to 39 miles an hour. I went face first into that minivan, then up and over the top. My bike went underneath. My $70,000 bike, torn into 3 pieces. After I landed on the street and stopped rolling, I jumped up to my feet and ran to the sidewalk. I was full of adrenaline and was thinking that I had got really lucky. I remember feeling a sharp pain in my abdomen area when I hit the van, but I had no idea my jaw was broken, along with 8 bones in my left hand. I also didn't know that the sharp pain I felt was my groin muscles being ripped from the bone. The pain didn't start to set in until the ambulance and the cops showed up. I figured out later that the handlebars of my motorcycle had gone right into my pubic bone at 39 miles an hour. My brother was telling the EMTs, "He's fine, everything's okay." But as soon as I sat down, I figured out I had not only totaled my bike, but had wrecked my body too. Still, I didn't want to get in the ambulance to go to the hospital, so Jesse drove me. They told me at the hospital I didn't have any internal bleeding, but they ran down the list of injuries I did have: broken jaw, broken left hand, bruised pelvis, pulled my groin so severely, it's painful for me to even list it here 6 years later. I had just gone through 6 or 7 weeks at Athlete's Performance to get into top physical condition. I was 298 pounds, doing high-impact weight training. I pissed it all away in about 3 seconds. The first call I made was to Luke, and then to my football agent. The only thing that held me together through that crash was the fact my body was rigid as hell. That weight training I had done with Luke saved my life. I could still talk because even though I broke my jaw, I refused to have it wired shut. My hand was in a small cast, which would stop my progress somewhat, but the worst thing was my groin injury. That was going to take forever to heal. There is no cast for that, no quick fix. If I had any hope of making an NFL roster, and more importantly, if I was going to escape WWE, I knew there was only one choice. Injuries or not, I had to train. I was pretty happy with my progress in the gym before the crash. I was bench pressing 405, sets of 12, safety squatting 860 pounds, and even though I weighed almost 300 pounds, I was running a 4.67 second 40-yard dash. That was nearly running back speed. I had NFL scouts drooling over me. But now, with my pro day only 2 weeks away, I was all busted up. I was thinking maybe God wanted me to slow my ass down. I had just left pro wrestling, which I thought was smart, but then I jumped on my chopper and took off like there was no tomorrow, which was really a dumbass thing for me to do. Yes, I wanted to be a football player. First, though, I needed to get everything in perspective. It was a time for me to be looking at the more important things in life. I went back to Phoenix and started recovery training. Lots of massage work, lifting weights, all sorts of exercises. I couldn't do any directional movement because I could hardly walk due to how badly my groin was pulled. I was in so much pain at the time that I couldn't even run in a straight line. No pro day for me. 3 weeks went by, and my times and weight numbers were picking up. although my groin was healing a lot slower than I would have liked. But just when I was starting to think I had missed my shot at football, the Minnesota Vikings called. They wanted me to come up and work out for them. There was no way I was going to pass up this chance. I was up front with the Vikings and told them about my accident. When I worked out for them, they knew I could have done much better if I hadn't been hurt. And they decided to give me another month to heal, then look at me again during training camp. My injuries were so severe that there was no way I was going to get through an 8-week NFL training camp. But Luke really helped get me back into the best shape I could be in, all things considered. Once I got to the training camp, it was right back to the Vicodin and anti-inflammatories. I'm not proud of it, but it's true, and I'm not going to sugarcoat or bullshit anyone in this book. I got through that training camp, and I was probably 3/4 of the man I should have been, and maybe even less than that. Maybe I was only half the man I should have or could have been, but I was still the last guy cut from the squad. I was proud of myself. There were guys who trained their whole lives to get to the NFL and who were superstars for major college football teams, and they got cut. I played a little high school football, jumped on and off the WWE train, worked out with Luke for a few weeks, crashed my bike, busted myself up pretty good, and almost made it. I know some people didn't believe me at the time, but getting cut wasn't a huge deal for me. I never thought of myself as a football player. I was just trying to do anything but pro wrestling. I just wanted to change everything about my life. I went pretty damn far during my little flirtation with the NFL. But when it didn't work out for me, I had to come to grips with the fact that I was unemployed. And I had a non-compete agreement that said I couldn't earn a living by being associated with or appearing for any wrestling or fighting organization in the world. Except, of course, the one owned by Vince McMahon. I swallowed my pride and had David Olson get in touch with the WWE for me. They said that Vince didn't want me back. The sword. All of a sudden, my problems were mounting. I missed the NFL by an inch. IRS problems. A legal battle over my visitation rights regarding my daughter Maya. No money coming in. And not that many options left because I signed that stupid non-compete clause with WWE. I had no one to blame but myself. My lawyers warned me not to sign that non-compete agreement, but I was in such a rush to get out of there, I got impatient and put my signature on that piece of paper. That cost me a few million. I guess this is where I'm supposed to say, you live and learn. But it still burns me to this day how much money I lost because they knew I was miserable and wanted to break away from their company. With all these pressures piling up, one on top of the other, I was depressed. Every day, I was drinking more and more vodka, chasing down more and more Vicodins. This was exactly where I was in WWE, except now I wasn't pulling in millions of dollars. I was quickly burning through what money I had, and I had no clue what I was going to do next. I had walked away from my wrestling career, so that door was shut. Thanks to the non-compete clause, so was every other door too. I was angry. I was drunk. I was pilled up. I was going to do damage to someone or something. My first victim? Myself. I ended up at a biker bar in Phoenix, right next door to which, and this may come as a big shock to you, there just so happened to be a tattoo parlor. I felt like life was holding a sword right up against my throat, so I went under the ink gun because I never wanted to forget exactly how I felt at that time. The bad times only make you appreciate the good times even more, and if I was ever told that I could only keep one tattoo, this one of the sword pointing right up against my throat is the one I'd keep. I wouldn't even have to think about the answer. This tattoo on my chest has so much meaning to me. In some ways, it's funny, because the period of my life that I'm talking about is a time I so want to forget, but I know I can use this memory as motivation. And just in case I ever start slipping up, I have this sword right across my torso as a constant reminder of all the things that changed my life. I look at that sword almost like it was a family crest. It's my inspiration to fight back, because if there's one thing I know deep in my heart about myself, It's that I am not a quitter. I am a warrior, and I will never let anything or anyone, be it the NFL or Vince McMahon, keep me down. Reena, will you marry me? Everywhere I looked, all I could see was uncertainty. But there was one thing I was sure of. I wanted to marry Reena. However, before I could do this, I needed her to get out of WWE. If we want a relationship, I told her, neither one of us can work for that company. We both know the long-term side effects of everything there. That was my only demand. Nothing else. Just that. And so she left World Wrestling Entertainment. She had worked so hard to get back into that company, and now she was leaving it again. Except this time, she was giving up her career for me. It couldn't have been an easy decision. I was all stressed out. My future was up in the air, and my daughter was still very young. Like all couples, we had some differences to work through, but Reena was willing to do whatever it would take to make things work. She deserves a lot of credit, because at that time, I was just creating controversy everywhere I turned. One day, of course, I pushed things too far, and Reena decided that she'd had enough of my bullshit. She was smart enough to pack her bags and go back to her own house in Florida. I knew she was the woman I was going to marry, and I also knew I'd screwed up by driving her away. I started calling her, but she wasn't going to make it easy for me. I guess I should have taken the hint after a week of her not taking my calls. As things turned out, I'm glad I didn't take the hint. You can think whatever you want about this statement, but I never really chased anyone before. It just wasn't my style. Here I am, calling her constantly, and I'll be the first one to admit I'm begging her to talk to me. By the time 2 weeks had gone by, I was beside myself. Reena wouldn't answer the phone, wouldn't return my calls. She was sending a message, loud and clear. She wasn't playing hard to get. She was letting me know that she would devote her life to me, but I had to play by the rules with her. I wanted her to know how serious I was about building a life together, so I hopped on a plane, and in a last-ditch effort to be with the woman I knew I should spend my life with, I headed down to Orlando. I made one stop on the way to the airport. I went to a jewelry store and bought an engagement ring. This was going to be all or nothing, and the stakes had never been higher. I'd been to Reena's house a bunch of times, but I never wrote down the address. I knew how to get there from the airport, but they didn't do me a lot of good. I got into a taxi cab, and right away I'm arguing with the stupid cabbie because he keeps telling me he needs an address. Don't worry about the address, I kept telling him. Just turn right, go down 6 lights. I had to force myself to calm down because I was going to punch this guy's lights out. Finally, I just got out of his cab and ended up in another taxi. This jackass of a driver pulls the same shit with me as the first guy. I need an address. I must know where I am going. Well, I'm trying to tell the guy where he's going. You go down this road, turn right. I ended up getting out of that cab too. I was running out of patience. I just wanted to get to Reena's house, see the woman I love, and get her to marry me. I can't even get there because these damn taxi drivers are all assholes. So I get into the third taxi of the day, and I tell the guy, listen, I'm having a bad day. I just need to go home. I don't even know my own address. I just know how to get there. Please, just take me where I want to go, okay? The taxi driver was either laughing at me or scared out of his mind. Either way, he says to me, just guide me along. I was so happy to hear him say that. Of course, it's not over yet. Reena lived in a gated community, and wouldn't you know it, the gate is closed when we got there. So I'm sitting there for over half an hour with the taxi driver, trying to figure out a way in, when lo and behold, another car pulls up. We went right in behind it, and after all this trouble, I finally get to Reena's house. I was so ready to see her. I rang the doorbell. I'm standing there, preparing myself for whatever reaction she has when she opens that door. If she's happy to see me, I'm scooping her up in my arms. If she's pissed, I know I have to make good on my stupid mistakes. So, what's it going to be? Well, I didn't find out right away, because Reena wasn't home. I'm standing there ringing the doorbell, and I know someone is going to notice me standing in front of her house and call the cops. I can't just break down the door because she has all this security. Plus, it would probably piss her off. So I decide to try to get in from the back of the house. Here's this 300-pound gorilla jumping the fence into the backyard, and it's not like I'm inconspicuous. I'm just hoping to God that maybe she left the window open or something like that. Of course, she didn't. Everything is all locked up. I saw a neighbor standing by his garage, and I knew he had seen me around with Reena enough to know we were a couple. That was a lucky break for me, because the guy never got suspicious. I told him I was working in the backyard and needed a screwdriver. It was the best excuse I could come up with. I used the screwdriver he loaned me to get into one of her sliding doors, and of course, the alarm goes off as soon as I get into the house. I knew the passcode, so I shut off the alarm, and now I'm inside. I returned the screwdriver to the neighbor, brought in my bags, and started waiting. I was sure Reena wasn't out of town because it was obvious that the house had been lived in. I figured she would come back, and we'd settle our problems. Well, I sat around for a couple of hours, and she still wasn't home. I started calling her from my cell phone, which was a dumbass move because she hadn't taken my calls in over 2 weeks. I didn't want her to know where I was, so I just kept calling her from my cell phone and not from her landline. I'm sitting in her house, and I'm stewing. I couldn't wait any longer, so I picked up her house phone and dialed her cell. You can probably imagine what must have gone through her mind when she looked at her cell phone and saw her own number pop up on the caller ID. She answered the phone, and me just being me, I just said, "Hey, how you doing?" Reena was pissed. "Brock, where are you calling me from?" Of course, I was going for broke here, so I said, "Don't you recognize the number?" She couldn't believe it. "You better not be at my house." I told her, "Well, I'm here, and I'll be here when you come home, because I'm waiting for you." Just to teach me a lesson, Reena took her own sweet-ass time getting home, making me wait and wait and wait. Once she got home, I knew she was happy to see me as I was to see her, but I still walked around on pins and needles. I ended up spending a week with Reena in Florida. When she took me to the airport, she came inside the terminal with me. It was right there, by the waterfall in the Orlando airport, that I asked her to marry me. I don't think my wife has ever regretted saying yes. I can tell you, I've never regretted it for a single moment. We were meant to be together. My not-so-secret meeting with Vince. I was the last man cut from the Viking squad. My mission was never to pursue a career in the NFL, but to escape WWE. Once I got cut by the Vikings and left Phoenix, I spent about 30 days doing nothing but hunting and thinking about my future. I had no interest in some of the weird offers that were coming in. Inside Edition wants to pay me for my story? No thanks. Stupid meathead movie roles? I think I'll pass on those too. Autograph signing appearances in shopping malls? I'm sorry, that's just not my style. I've never been one to prostitute myself out for the quick buck. I needed to find something I could be proud of doing, and enjoy the ride while it lasted. I wanted to do something my parents would approve of, something that would allow me to provide the things for my family that I always envisioned them having. I couldn't figure out which way to turn, and then my lawyer, David Olson, called me with some interesting news. David had been contacted by New Japan Pro Wrestling, the big group based out of Tokyo and run by Antonio and Simon Inoki. They were thinking about all the hype they could build around a shooter who'd become the youngest WWE champion in history, and were looking to cut a deal right away. I'd never thought about wrestling in Japan, or anywhere else for that matter, because WWE had me sign that non-compete agreement, which said I could only wrestle for Vince, and I thought I was on the shelf until 2010. So instead of having David get back to the Japanese right away, I told him to contact WWE. If I went back to the company, though, I didn't want it to be like the first time. I wanted to have some control over when and where I worked. I was going to make sure up front that I had time off written into my deal, and I wanted to get paid what I thought I was worth. Over the next several months, David went back and forth with the WWE lawyers, trying to work out the details. Then I had a fateful phone conversation with The Undertaker. Taker had heard that Vince was going to send word that there was no interest in bringing me back. Vince will always do what he thinks is the right thing for his business, and he's a master negotiator. He used Undertaker to deliver the message to me, and both Taker and I knew it was bullshit. Vince knew it was bullshit too, but it was his starting position. I never said he was dumb. I told Taker I wanted to hear the words, "We're not interested in you," straight from the horse's mouth. So we arranged what was supposed to be a top-secret meeting between me and Vince. This part still makes me laugh to this day. As soon as I walked into the WWE offices, they had cameras all over me. Before Vince and I even said hello to each other, the front page of their website had the headline, "Brock Lesnar meets with WWE." So on one side of the world, I'm walking into Vince McMahon's office to see if we can patch things up, put everything behind us, and do some business together again. On the other side of the planet, the Inokis are reading about my secret meeting with Vince and are starting to think they're in a bidding war with WWE. By putting our secret meeting on the internet, Vince gave me all the leverage I needed to negotiate with the Inokis. He might as well have put a big red bow on this early Christmas present. The Inokis had put so much thought into bringing me in, it was now a matter of pride for them. They were willing to pay whatever it took to keep me from going back to WWE. I didn't want to have to go all the way to Japan to make a living. If I could have had my way, I would have ended up back in WWE, but on my own terms. I walked into that meeting with Vince to give him first dibs on my services. All he had to do was be reasonable with me. If he wanted me back, he had that opportunity. If he didn't want me back, then I was just wasting my time so that Vince could look me in the eye and tell me how disappointed he was that I left. It was his decision, and it wasn't going to take long for me to find out which way the meeting was headed. Vince invited John Laurinaitis to join us in the meeting. Laurinaitis had replaced Jim Ross as head of the Talent Relations Department, and Vince wanted him to sit in with us while we talked things out. I'm not one to beat around the bush, so I told Vince, right in front of John, that we were getting started on the wrong foot. I thought this was going to be mano a mano, I told Vince. Obviously, he had other ideas. "Well, Brock," Vince said, setting the tone for the entire meeting, "John runs talent relations, and I'd be disrespecting him if I asked him to leave this meeting. I'd be excusing him from a meeting that affects his entire department." All I could think of was, just get to the part about my deal. I'm not even here 10 minutes, and I'm already sour on the experience. Before we could talk about money, Vince and John had to play their little games with me. John started talking about the tattoo on my chest, and actually asked me to take my shirt off. Right there, in the middle of a fucking business meeting. And not just any business meeting either, but one where the people involved were trying to put a lot of bad blood behind them. There were issues that had had a lot of time to work themselves out, but both sides were still hot at each other. We're trying to find a way to work together again, to make money with each other, and the head of the talent department wants me to take my damn shirt off in the chairman's office so I can show off my new tattoo? Screw that. That's when Vince stakes out his position and tells me I'll have to start all over again because I walked out of my first deal. "Start at the bottom and work your way back up to the top," he tells me. "That's the only way this is going to work." Vince wasn't talking about a push. He was talking payroll. I'd have to come back for a deal worth a lot less than I'd been making. The fact that I'd left on top meant nothing. Vince was offering me a rookie deal, and he knew it was a complete insult. It didn't matter that my value was still high, that I put over Eddie Guerrero for the title and Goldberg at WrestleMania. It didn't matter that I could be back on top in no time at all, or that I could be back drawing Vince big money with the right reintroduction, the right angle, even just the right promo. Vince wanted to bully me like he does everyone else, because most people who end up on the outs with Vince McMahon don't have a pot to piss in. They have to crawl back on their hands and knees begging for scraps. Well, I had a ton of problems and a tattoo that symbolized the sword I felt I had at my throat, but I wasn't going to let anyone talk to me like I'm a piece of shit. Vince was talking to me like I was some low-life jerk-off who had nowhere else to go. What Vince never understood about me is that I am, at heart, still a poor kid from that farm in Webster, South Dakota. Yes, I lived the life of a rock star for a few years in WWE, but I knew I could be happy with my future wife no matter what I did for a living or how much money I made. If I had to drive a truck for a living, I'd be one happy, hard-working truck driver married to the woman I love and satisfied with myself because I never let anyone talk to me the way Vince did in that meeting. He could have had me back, almost 100% on his terms, except with just a little concession about the schedule. And he blew it. I walked out of Vince's office and headed for the airport. Reena asked me on the phone if I had decided anything. Yes, I told her. I decided I don't want to go back to work for Vince McMahon. What I didn't tell her is that I also decided right there and then that I was going to find out what the Inokis were willing to pay me to wrestle in Japan. Brad Ringens had been working with New Japan for about 19 years, so I made sure I got him in on the deal. With Brad on my team, I had the perfect person to smarten me up to the Inokis' way of doing business. I knew going to Japan could be a big score, but I also knew I was going to have a good strategy to get that kind of money out of the Inokis. I also knew Vince McMahon was going to do everything in his power to stop me from making a living. Brock Lesnar versus WWE. In January 2005, about 9 months after leaving WWE, I went to Japan with Reena and Brad. I wanted to see exactly what opportunities I had waiting for me over there, but I had to be very careful not to do anything that would get me sued by Vince McMahon. My lawyers and I decided it was best for me to pay for my own plane ticket and sit in the front row. Did I know that this would only drive my price up with New Japan? Of course I did. My mission was to see what kind of show they put on and how I could see myself making a big impact. Once I got to Tokyo, the Inokis wanted to get every bit of publicity out of my arrival as they could get. It was an interesting game. They were getting press based on me coming over to see their show, and I was becoming more and more valuable because I had not committed to them, or even to myself really, that I was going to be part of New Japan Pro Wrestling. When I arrived at the arena, the Inokis kept pushing me for more and more. They wanted to get as much out of me as they could. They asked me if they could introduce me to the crowd. I didn't have one of my lawyers with me, but how could being introduced to the crowd hurt? I wasn't getting paid to be there. Yes, I was playing my cards, driving up my price, seeing what buzz I could manufacture before having to make some tough decisions. I'm in Tokyo. I'm not wrestling. I'm not performing. I'm sitting in the crowd, and I'm going to be introduced as a celebrity in attendance. The Inoki suggested I walk down the big entrance ramp into the arena so the crowd could see me come in and then be seated. They told me this is what they would do with any big celebrity guest. The news hit the internet within a matter of minutes. Brock Lesnar introduced at New Japan show. And then, all hell broke loose. WWE's lawyers were making all kinds of noise about my trip. Vince didn't want me having anything to do with any other wrestling organization, and the lawyers were making threats about enforcing my non-compete agreement and suing New Japan too. Vince didn't want me back unless I agreed to go right back to life on the road with no breaks. That's what drove me away the first time. But now, if I returned to WWE, I'd have to try to survive that schedule, and not even for the pay I had worked my ass off for that company to earn. No, Vince wanted me to come in and work that brutal, killer schedule for little to no money at all. WWE's lawyers were threatening to sue me if I even thought about working for any other wrestling company, anywhere in the world, in any capacity. The sword was at my throat. Anyone who knows me will tell you that I'm not one to back down from a fight. I wanted to work, and Vince was telling me I couldn't. My lawyers were telling me that the non-compete agreement was unenforceable for far too many reasons that I will bore you with here. You can't keep a human being from earning a living. And that's exactly the prison Vince McMahon and his team of attorneys was forcing me to live in. If I decided to work for New Japan, I could expect to get sued by WWE. If I wrestled a damn polar bear on the North Pole, WWE would sue me, if for no other reason than because they could. They love to bully people around that way. This was a fight, so I decided to strike first. I filed a lawsuit against World Wrestling Entertainment and asked the federal court in Connecticut to declare my non-compete clause illegal. Anyone who knows Vince will tell you he loves a good fight, and he wasn't going to back down from this one. His lawyers countersued me for breach of contract and wanted me to pay for all the damage I caused WWE by leaving the company. They wanted me to pay for all their legal fees. I had enough of my own legal fees to pay, thank you, and asked the judge to declare the non-compete agreement to be binding. They wanted to force me to sit out the prime of my career all the way until 2010, or go back to work for WWE. Vince loves to tell everyone how much he hates managers, agents, and especially lawyers, but he plays the attorney game better than anyone. I had to pay my lawyers in Minnesota, and also a law firm on the East Coast that was licensed in the state of Connecticut. WWE's strategy was to make me go broke, request more documents, another extension of time, another request for more paperwork. If they could spin me into a hole, I'd have to drop my lawsuit and come back on my hands and knees, begging for forgiveness. It was a smart strategy on Vince's part. Hey, just the cost of living was hard enough to manage, but I was funding a lawsuit for my freedom. I knew I couldn't back down, but paying all these legal fees was bleeding me dry. I told my lawyers to cut a deal for me with New Japan, but the Inokis were leery of getting sued by WWE. Oh, did I forget to tell you that WWE stopped all my royalty payments when they decided to sue me? I had no income, and everyone was scared of the big bad monster WWE and their legal tactics. I can see how Vince beats all these other guys into submission. He almost did it to me. I swallowed my pride and agreed to meet with Vince again in July 2005. The tone of this meeting was a lot different from the last one, probably because we weren't just talking about me coming back to WWE, but also we were discussing settling the lawsuit. Vince didn't have anyone in the room to show off in front of, so the meeting was refreshing. We cleared the air on a lot of issues, and I left Vince's office thinking we had a deal. I went home and told Reena, "Looks like I'm going back to work for WWE." Vince's lawyers sent a whole bunch of paperwork to David Olson, and you'd think I never had that meeting with Vince. In my opinion, everything Vince and I discussed had been thrown out the window. I thought we had an understanding. Obviously, I was wrong. I had to think long and hard about what to do next. Do I just cave in, suck it up, and do what I have to do to make a living? Do I keep fighting this uphill battle where I have to pay 2 sets of lawyers against a company that is intentionally running up my legal tab as a defensive strategy? It took me a little while, but I finally made the decision to keep fighting. I could never look at myself in the mirror if I just tucked my tail between my legs and put up with the way WWE was trying to treat me. I had my lawyers finalize my deal with New Japan so I could have a few bucks to live on while I spent everything else on the lawsuit. When I cut my deal with New Japan, I made sure to get Brad Ringens in on it because I wanted to use his experience with Japanese management to my advantage and keep him by my side in all my dealings. Plus, I figured going to Japan would be a great experience. I'd pick up some excellent coin, eat some fresh sushi, have some good times with Brad, and deliver a great big fuck you to Vince. That's how I entered the world of Japanese professional wrestling. New Japan Pro Wrestling. My first match in Japan was a triple threat match against Fujita and Chono on October 8, 2005. It really didn't matter who they put in the ring with me. I knew the Japanese crowds were looking for a monster heel. They wanted someone they could ooh and awe about, and I was going to be that guy. I was happy to be working and making money again, but my whole time there, I was waiting for bad news to drop at any moment. That's the mind game a lawsuit plays with you. As soon as New Japan started advertising my first match, the WWE lawyers tried to stop me from appearing. They threatened New Japan and claimed they were going to get an injunction to prevent me from doing the match. Right up until the time I stepped on the plane to Japan, I was actually expecting my lawyers to call me on my cell and say, "Go back home, Brock. WWE pulled such and such legal maneuver and the match is off." Lucky for me, WWE's lawyers were full of shit. WWE never sued New Japan, and they never got an injunction to prevent me from working my scheduled match. But that wasn't the end of the hassle. I was scheduled to wrestle on a couple of shows in Japan in December, and then go back to work their big annual show on January 4th, 2006. I thought all of the shows would go off without a hitch, because while the WWE's legal dogs had barked a lot, they had shown themselves to have no bite. They made all these threats about forcing me to sit out the October show, and they kept backing down every time. I thought it was a case of the boy who cried wolf. I was wrong. Right before I headed out to Japan for the December shows, WWE filed what is called a Motion for Temporary Restraining Order, or a TRO. I wasn't too well versed in these legal terms at the time, but I've sure learned them thanks to my hard-way education from World Wrestling Entertainment and their team of attorneys. WWE asked the judge who was presiding over our lawsuit to issue an immediate injunction against me that would prevent me from wrestling on the New Japan shows. If I decided to ignore the TRO, I would be in contempt of court. My lawyers fought back, but the judge was taking his time in making a decision. You can't tell a judge to hurry up because Brock wants to know whether to get on the plane to Japan or not. So during my whole flight over to Japan, I'm wondering if I'm even going to get to work when I land. I kept thinking how pissed off I was going to be if I had to turn right back around once I landed in Japan because the judge ruled against me and in favor of WWE. The judge, however, never granted the TRO, and I wrestled on and got paid for the December shows. When I got back to the United States, I was told that WWE formally withdrew its motion because they knew it was a loser. They never really wanted the judge to make a decision. In my opinion, WWE's motion, like most of their threats, was just a legal form of harassment intended to make me lose sleep and spend as much money as possible on lawyers. I went back to Japan again for their major annual show on January 4th, 2006, and did a few more shows after that. I'm sure it burned Vince's ass that he couldn't do anything to stop me. I was a vengeful person for many years. An eye for an eye wasn't just a saying to me, it was a way of life. In time, I've come to learn just how much this kind of negativity wears you down, but back then, I wasn't ready to accept that truth. My finishing maneuver in New Japan was the very same one I used in WWE. In WWE, it was called the F5. In New Japan, it was called the Verdict. That was my way of sending a message to Vince and his fucking lawyers. I planned on kicking WWE's ass in court, and I wanted the world to know I was still a top dog whose bite was every bit as bad as his bark, if not badder. Once the Inokis realized that Vince was not going to be able to stop me from wrestling for them, they went ahead and built their company around me. We were off to the races, and before anyone knew it, I beat Fujita and Chono in a triple threat match to win the IWGP World Heavyweight title. One of my old coaches used to tell me that 80% of the things we spend our time worrying and having nightmares about never actually happen. We spend so much of our lives racking our brains about things that will never materialize. It's all such a waste of valuable time. But I'll be the first to admit I didn't understand this until I got into UFC and focused on the truly important things in life. Back when I had to travel all the way to Japan just to earn a living, the sword was still at my throat, and it was tough to have a positive outlook on anything. With all that negativity around me, it didn't take long for me to get back on that vodka and Vicodin kick. Brad called me the other day to ask about this book, and he was reminding me of a match I had with a Japanese wrestler named Nakanishi. Brad thought it was one of the best matches he ever saw me fight, and we both remembered that I was half shooting on the poor guy. Unfortunately, that's all I remember about the match. Brad remembers so much more about it. But when you're poisoning your system with pills and alcohol, your memory is one of the first things that gets affected. I can come up with a lot of reasons why I got back on that drugs and booze train again, but they're all excuses. My back was killing me at the time, and I was in constant pain. I went into the hospital for an MRI and found out I had ruptured 2 vertebrae, which meant I was flying across the world to wrestle with a broken back. The doctors were telling me my situation was serious enough that they were strongly recommending surgery. No thanks, not for me. I knew too many athletes who had back surgeries and never recovered. I was going to get through it on my own. But that's a lot easier said than done. I was having what is called strong style matches against all the top guys New Japan had to offer. In WWE, everyone performs a very safe style, or as safe as professional wrestling can be, given that the company is built on the name entertainment. In New Japan Pro Wrestling, the wrestlers go out of their way to try to convince the audience that pro wrestling is still somewhat for real. The office actually encourages the wrestlers to go out there and beat the hell out of each other. If someone gets hurt, it's considered good for the business. I didn't mind wrestling strong style, but doing it with 2 ruptured vertebrae was just plain stupid of me. I'd get back into my locker room with Brad and just collapse from the pain. I wasn't about to let anyone know how I was really feeling, so the only way to mask it all was to swallow more Vicodins and wash them down with more vodka. I'm so blessed that I'm alive to tell this story, because there are a lot of people who went through the same thing as me who aren't around today. Thank God I woke up one morning and decided that enough was enough. I knew if I kept on living this way, I would just one day stop living. Eventually, the odds catch up to you. There's no escaping the inevitability that something will go wrong, whether it's choking on your own vomit while you're sleeping or falling down while you're all fucked up and smashing your head. There's too many ways to fuck up when you've dulled your own senses to the point that you're numb to everything. So, I just stopped. Cold turkey. I didn't stop because I went to some WWE-sponsored rehab. I didn't stop because I went into therapy or counseling or anything like that. I stopped because I wanted to see my daughter, Maya, grow up, and I knew I wasn't going to be there for her if I kept going in the wrong direction. My timing couldn't have been better. The Inokis were having a lot of internal problems with their company, and I knew that New Japan was on a downswing. My time in their organization was quickly coming to an end, but I wanted to go out with a bang. That's where Akebono comes into the picture. Akebono was a big-time national superstar in Japan. Even though he was originally from Hawaii and not Japan, he was respected as a legitimate sports icon, a folk hero, because he was a dominant Japanese sumo champion. I was happy when the Inokis told me they wanted me to do a match with him because I knew we could build it up as the great big American heel champion against the even bigger Japanese sumo legend. I saw big dollar signs in that matchup. Akebono is another giant of a man who has a great big heart. I believe we could have drawn big money against each other if the Inokis had played their cards right. I called Akebono Big Chad, and he was one of the few guys in the wrestling business I considered to be a friend. I wanted to make our matchup mean something so we could enjoy a long program and make a lot of money with each other. But the Inokis had no long-term vision for Brock Lesnar versus Akebono. They wanted me to beat him right on television. I couldn't believe it. Why would they want me to kill what could be a great feud with one match on free TV? Now, I understood one of the reasons why Steve Austin had been so angry that day in Atlanta when WWE wanted to hotshot our first match on Monday Night Raw. Because I'm a stubborn bastard, I demanded that we do what's called a fuck finish, so we could come back with a rematch down the road. I had this idea about me and Big Chad doing all these big man spots, and at the right time, I'd smack him in the head with the IWGP title belt. The Inokis kept wanting me to just beat Big Chad, but I wore them down until they agreed to do the finish my way. So Big Chad and I go out to the ring, and we're doing all the typical spots big powerful guys do against each other. We do the shoulder tackle attempts where no one budges, the spot where I run into the ropes and collide with Big Chad, or he comes charging into me and we both end up in each other's faces. When it came time for the finish, I cracked the big fucker upside his melon with the title belt just like I planned. Big Chad dropped to the canvas, I covered him, and the entire arena went quiet. Dead silence. Not a single sound from the crowd. The audience wasn't buying it. They didn't pay to see a fuck finish, and they're too intelligent to buy into a cheap horseshit heel victory like that. What a dumbass mistake I had just made. The referee dropped down and started counting, and I'm saying to Big Chad, "Kick out, you son of a bitch, kick out! 1, 2, and the instant before the referee hits the canvas for the 3 count, Big Chad gets his arm up in the air, and the people went nuts. We ended up doing some ridiculous finish that served no purpose except to piss off the Inokis, but at least Big Chad cared enough to give them the best match we could manage, and I think, all things considered, it was one hell of a match. The fact that Big Chad and I could put together a solid match didn't surprise me. He's a trained athlete with a lot of pride, and so am I. What did surprise me was that the Inokis didn't try to get me to drop the title before I left Japan. They probably knew better than to make me feel like I was being backed into a corner, because I was already pissed off that they started playing games with my money. I thought I was being smart when I went to Japan because I insisted on private transportation, first-class hotel accommodations with all expenses paid, you name it. If I have to travel halfway around the world to work, at least I'm going to be comfortable while I'm over there. Part of my deal with New Japan was also to get paid up front. My lawyer set up an escrow account in the United States, and our deal was that I don't get on a plane until the Inokis wire my money into that account. Then when my match is over, the money is released directly to me, so I never have to worry about going over to Japan and getting stiffed on my payoff. The system worked. For a while. On one of my last trips to Japan, I didn't get all my money up front, but I got on the plane anyway. I figured the Inokis needed me because I was their champion, and I wasn't going to step into their ring until I got the word that all of my money had been deposited into the U.S. account. What could go wrong? Plenty. But I should have known that. Another lesson in life, and I guess an interesting story for this book. When my match was over, the Inokis threw me onto the bus with all the other boys headed to the airport. What the hell? It was in my contract that I was supposed to have a car and driver from the time I landed in Japan until the time I'm dropped off at the airport to go home. That bus ride is just brutal, and I wanted no part of it. The Inokis knew I wasn't expecting to end up riding the bus, and I kept wondering to myself, why would they give the IWGP World Heavyweight Champion such a Bush League send-off? What game were they trying to play with me? I'd been schooled in all sorts of shenanigans the Inokis could try and pull on me. Brad had smartened me up to a famous negotiating trick the Inokis like to use. They take you to lunch or dinner, and then just stare at you, trying to make you feel uncomfortable. They want you to do all the talking so that you reveal your cards and expose your own business strategy. The first 3 times I met with the Inokis, that's exactly how they tried to play me. Thanks to Brad, I was wise to that tactic, so it didn't work with me. I would stare back at the Inokis and talk about whatever popped into my head. I'd keep saying things like, "How about this weather? This food is really great. What a beautiful country you have." I would go on about anything and everything, except business. I knew their game, and I was ready for it. That probably drove them crazy. Another game I was ready for was the Inoki slap. I guess part of the initiation over in Japan is that all the newcomers end up getting slapped by Antonio Inoki, who is a living legend over there. I let them know where I stood on that one right away. No one was going to slap me. Not Inoki, not anyone. They got the point. But when they threw me on the bus with everyone else, I looked over at Brad, who had seen it all in Japan. Even he didn't know what was coming next, so we knew to be prepared for anything. When we got to the airport, Simon Inoki comes up to me and says in this soft-spoken, respectful tone, "Mr. Lesnar, you should leave the title belt with me, because we want to polish it up for you and fix the rhinestones so that the belt looks very nice for you when you come back to Japan." The Inokis had to know there was a chance I wasn't coming back, so that meant there was a possibility that they were going to ask me to turn over the title belt. I was one up on them, though, because I had the title belt buried all the way at the bottom of my suitcase. and you can just imagine what my grip on that suitcase must have been like. I was holding on for dear life because they still hadn't paid me, and I wanted to keep their title belt as an insurance policy. As long as I had possession of the IWGP Heavyweight Championship belt, I knew they would find a way to come up with the money they owed me. As polite as Simon was to me, I was even more polite to him. I thanked him for the offer to take care of the belt for me, but told him that I was planning on polishing it myself back home and that I was going to make the rhinestones look nice for the New Japan fans. Always trying to stay one step ahead of everyone, the Inokis must have anticipated my response because Simon had a couple of the New Japan wrestlers with him. It looked to me and Brad like they were going to try to strong-arm me for the title belt. They had the advantage because I was a foreigner on their home turf and didn't speak the language, and if security jumped in, they could say anything they wanted to. But when those guys tried to intimidate us, Brad and I stared right back at them as we backed 10 steps to the ticket counter, where I just let them know in no uncertain terms, I'm taking the title with me. There was nothing they could do at that point unless they wanted to create a major incident in an international airport. So Brad and I checked in and got on the plane with the title belt still in my possession. I'd heard New Japan was talking to TNA about a joint promotion, and it was easy to figure out that they were going to want me to come back and drop the title. That gave me a lot of negotiating leverage. I had something they wanted, and they had the money to pay me, so I used that to my advantage. I didn't have to wait long. My lawyers called me and said Simon had called and wanted me to set up a big title match in Japan. I told David Olson, here's my price, tell them that number, and let them know they can take it or leave it. My price was $250,000 for one match. My opponent was Kurt Angle, who was on loan to New Japan through TNA. I was happy to work with Kurt and was looking forward to dropping the title to him. Dixie Carter, the TNA president, sent Kurt all the way to Japan to work with me, and it was no secret that he was only getting something like $15,000 for the match. I didn't tell him how much I was getting, because Kurt Hennig taught me early on never to tell the other guy what you're making, and never believe what the other guy is telling you he made. I had been off the pain medication for a while and was getting close to my court date with WWE, where the final decision that would free me to work anywhere I chose was going to be rendered. I was putting my life together, and I was feeling good about my future. Kurt, on the other hand, was still on that one-way train to destruction. I kept telling him, Kurt, you gotta stop living this way. You gotta jump off that train. You're killing yourself. He didn't listen, because from where I was sitting, it looked to me like Kurt had fallen into the trap of being in denial. He kept saying to me, I'm fine, Brock, I'm fine. I'm okay. I'm really fine. And then he'd repeat the same things he just said 5 minutes earlier without realizing what he was doing. We talked about our futures, and Kurt was pushing how we should both go to UFC and make a big payoff fighting each other for real. The sad thing is that Kurt really believed it was a possibility for him, but I knew better. There was zero chance Kurt could compete in the UFC in the kind of condition he was in. I kept thinking, how does he think he will pass the physicals? I hate saying this, but I don't think Kurt will ever escape the pro wrestling lifestyle. He was pretty far gone in Japan, and he's even deeper into the lifestyle now. I feel for him. He's lost his first wife, his kids, and the only thing he has is his identity as a professional wrestler. Kurt just got married again recently, and he and his wife just had a brand new baby. I really hope he finds some peace and happiness, but I wouldn't bet on it, because some people can jump off the train before it's too late, and some people can't. Kurt Angle is one of those who will ride it to the bitter end. As I promised I would do, I dropped the IWGP title, passing the torch to the new champion. That title no longer meant anything to me. I was hoping, just maybe, it meant enough to Kurt to be a world champion again that he would evaluate his life and change at least some of the ways he was killing himself. When I did that match, I was sure that I would never have to lace up a pair of wrestling boots again, with just one exception. In the back of my mind, I knew that when I became a big enough commodity doing something else in life, there would always be a big payday waiting for me when I decided to come back for one big event, one big night. one big match. But that was looking far into the future. Nothing could happen until I wrapped up my lawsuit with WWE. Brock Lesnar versus WWE. WWE versus Brock Lesnar. I had spent a fortune fighting against a big, publicly traded company that had unlimited resources. WWE did an excellent job making me spend a ridiculous amount of money fighting for the simple right to go out and work for a living. But the day of reckoning was at hand. In February 2006, the judge ordered us to enter into what's called mediation, which is an attempt to settle the case before a trial in front of a federal magistrate in Bridgeport, Connecticut. If we were not able to reach a settlement, the judge would finally decide the motion I had filed nearly a year earlier to have my non-compete agreement declared to be a worthless piece of shit. WWE was running out of ways to delay that from happening. But what was I going to do once I was a free man? The mediation was scheduled for the day after the Super Bowl, so David Olson and I flew in and caught part of the game in the hotel bar. We got up the next morning and headed for the courthouse, and I wasn't holding out any hope that WWE would accept any settlement because Vince McMahon wasn't going to allow me to show that his non-compete agreements were unenforceable. WWE claimed that my demand for freedom was outrageous. I thought WWE's offers were insulting. We kept going back and forth, and I just wanted to walk out and go home, but the judge had ordered us to hash things out this way, so we finally worked out the outline of a deal. Settling the case was the right move to make because if it came to trial, and even if I won in court, there would be appeals and more delays, and I just wanted to be done with it all and move on with everything. WWE was motivated to settle because they didn't want a public court declaring their non-compete clauses to be illegal. That would open the floodgates and cause them all sorts of problems with other wrestlers who might be thinking about leaving. I've been warned by my lawyers that I can't go into detail here about the terms of the settlement because it's confidential. What horseshit. I made some compromises, and so did WWE. In the end, we both got a deal we could live with. There. I didn't reveal any specifics, but you get the point. WWE didn't lose face, and I was a free man, with my whole life ahead of me, and the ability to choose how I wanted to earn a living so that I could feed my family. All I had to do now was make the decision regarding what I wanted to do. I didn't have to think about it very long. I wanted to compete as a real athlete. I wanted to test myself. I talked it over with Reena, who is now my wife, and she assured me she would be supportive in anything I decided I was going to do. My wife knows I'm a competitor, and that competition is what drives me. It's in my blood. It's what I want to do. It's what I was made for. In 2006, the fight business was picking up steam and getting a lot of serious attention from the media. It looked to me like there was money to be made if I could stir up some noise and grab everyone's attention again. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but nothing worthwhile in life ever is. My legal battle with WWE was behind me. So was the NFL, New Japan Pro Wrestling, and my dance with vodka and Vicodins. It was time to get back to doing what was second nature to me, what I'd been trained to do since I was 5 years old. So looking for the next great challenge in my life, I got into the world of mixed martial arts. A whole new adventure was about to begin. Getting started in mixed martial arts. When I decided to become a fighter, there were certain things I had to accept from day one. I'm an athlete and a wrestler, but that doesn't automatically make me a great mixed martial artist. To get to the top of the sport, I was going to need a lot of coaching. I asked around about all the different training facilities and decided to give Pat Militich's gym in Bettendorf, Iowa a try. Pat was one of the pioneers of mixed martial arts, and he is very well respected within the MMA community. He's a former UFC champion, and his gym has produced guys like Matt Hughes, Tim Sylvia, Jens Pulver, and Robbie Lawler. I immediately liked Pat because he was originally an amateur wrestler, so he knew what it would take to transform another wrestler into a fighter. I trained with Pat and his team for a while, And during the time I was with them, I really learned a lot. This is no knock on Pat, because I respect his work and appreciate all that I learned from him, but I soon realized that his gym wasn't for me. I figured I had money again, and I could afford to create my own camp, one that was dedicated to one and only one purpose, which was making me the best fighter I could be in the shortest period of time. I didn't want to spend years and years going through MMA's equivalent of my time in Louisville. I wanted to fight for a living, and my thought was that if you have a gym designed to accommodate a bunch of fighters, then no one gets the full benefit of the coaching staff. It's spread too thin. Where's the focus? But if you have your own training facility and everyone is dedicated to the goal of making you the best, you have a better chance of reaching your full potential. There's a lot of money at the end of that rainbow, and I wanted to reach for the pot of gold. From the moment I decided to get into mixed martial arts, I knew I wanted to be in the UFC. That's the big league, the only place to be. The UFC is the most professionally run organization, and the people there have the resources to put on big-time fights for big-time money. No rinky-dink bush league bullcrap for that organization. It's first class all the way. The best thing about the fight business is that people pay to see a fight, and for the most part, you're going to see someone win and someone lose. It's a simple formula. If you want to be the best, you have to enter the fight and go for broke. No one is going to be champion for long by attempting to win on points. Ultimately, there are only two positions a fighter can be in. Either you're number one or you're not. For me, number one is the only place to be, because number two is just not good enough. It's the same as being last. I had my goal set, but I also had a problem. The UFC saw me as a WWE fake wrestler. Yes, I had a name, but I had no MMA experience to speak of, which meant I had to start somewhere else. Believe it or not, that road led me right back to doing business with a company in Japan. I was getting offers to fight as soon as word got out that I'd been training at the Militich camp. It didn't matter if they promoted fights in arenas, on beaches, or in high school gyms. Everyone wanted to promote my first mixed martial arts fight. WFA, WMA, Bodog, Hook and Shoot, the list goes on. In April 2006, David Olson and a new member of my legal team, Brian Stedman, set up a meeting for me with the Japanese promotion K1. This promotion is owned by a company called FEG, and they sent their international operations manager, Daisuke Teraguchi, and their Japanese-American lawyer, Toru Nakahara, to Minnesota to cut a deal with me. We met at the Minneapolis Grand Hotel for a sushi dinner. The food was great, but the meeting was going way too slow for my taste. Unlike the Inokis, who just sit there and stare at you, waiting for you to tip your hand, these guys just wanted to talk and talk and talk. I thought they would never get down to the bottom line, so against my lawyer's advice, I spoke up and cut to the chase. Right in the middle of the tuna rolls, I told them I needed $2 million for one fight or there was nothing further to talk about. To their credit, Daisuke and Toru didn't even blink. They calmly asked if they could have a few minutes to discuss my demand in private. Feeling my oats, I generously said they could have 15 minutes and that I wanted an answer. I went outside with David and Brian, and we just looked at one another. I was supposed to let them do the talking and negotiating, but I'd felt like the meeting was going nowhere with everyone just smiling at each other and telling stories. My lawyers were in disbelief, because by handling the meeting the way I'd done, they thought I might have killed my MMA career before it started, and I wasn't about to disagree. We started laughing, because depending on what happened in the next 15 minutes, I was either going to fail negotiating 101 or get an A+ in the graduate level course, and the suspense wasn't going to last very long. David bet me the FEG execs would be sitting in a cab on their way to the airport by the time we returned. When we walked back into the restaurant, though, they were still sitting at the table. They told us they could probably make the deal work, but that they would need to confirm the details with some people in Japan before they could commit. The fact that they weren't already halfway back to Tokyo seemed like a very good sign. While my lawyers were working out the details with K1, I was working on becoming a fighter. Part of the agreement was that I could choose my own trainers, and FEG would foot the bill. They wanted me to be ready to fight by August 2006. There were a lot of rumors floating around that they were trying to get my first opponent to be Royce Gracie, UFC's very first star, and the heir to the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu throne. I was living just outside Minneapolis, and I was looking for a place to train locally. I didn't want to go to California or Nevada or anywhere else to train. As far as I was concerned, my traveling days were over. Everyone I talked to on the local MMA scene seemed to have a high opinion of Greg Nelson, who ran the Minnesota Martial Arts Academy, so I stopped by his gym one day. Greg was a former U of M wrestler like me, had trained UFC World Champion Sean Shirk and others, and he agreed to take me on and get me ready for my K1 fight. Now that I was a professional fighter and was about to make a lot of money, my lawyers told me they were creating a new company for tax purposes and that I had to choose the name. David, Brian, and I were on a three-way phone conversation, and we were just throwing names back and forth. The Death Collector had been suggested by a guy who wanted to do t-shirts for us, but that was too WWE for me. And then I said, what about Death Clutch? That name really worked for me because after the lawsuit with Vince and all of the other shit that I'd been through, I felt like I had been in one death clutch after another. I could hear the call of the match in my head. Lesnar gets his hands around his opponent's body. It's the death clutch. I couldn't wait to get started, but just as I was ramping up my training, K1 told me that they had not yet secured an opponent for what I thought would be my October 2006 fight. Oh wait, it gets worse. They didn't have an arena, or even a pay-per-view clearance yet either. My goal was to be in a major league organization, but I knew at that moment I was still in the minors. K1 offered me big money for an extension on my contract. If I told them no, I just have to take a fight for another minor league organization before the UFC would seriously consider me. Since I was already in business with K1, I agreed to the extension and kept training with Greg Nelson. In the fall of 2006, I heard that K1 had signed the Techno Goliath, a 7'1" Korean kickboxer and MMA fighter named Hong Man Choi, and wanted to pit us against each other in May 2007 at Dodger Stadium in LA. I never heard of Hong Man Choi, so we looked him up. He was known for being this big, entertaining son of a bitch, a friendly, gentle giant who could maul people in fights. But the one thing that I couldn't get over was the size of his head. I mean, his noggin was enormous, even bigger than Big Show's. It was massive. I kept thinking that as soon as the referee said fight, I was going straight for that huge target right between his shoulders. Hong Man Choi had an international reputation, but he was big and slow, and I knew I could eat him up. It was around this time that I talked to my old U of M wrestling coach, Marty Morgan. Since I was scheduled to fight a giant, I wanted to train with some big guys. Marty was training Cole Conrad at the University of Minnesota, and I started hitting the punching bag with Marty while rolling around with Cole and other heavyweights on the squad. I felt alive again. After all I had been through, it didn't matter who they put in front of me at that first fight. I had a new lease on life, and I wasn't going to fail. About a month before my scheduled fight, K1 tells us there's going to be another delay. They couldn't get Dodger Stadium, so now the fight was going to be moved to June 2007 at the LA Coliseum. You know the routine. K1 said they were planning to make this the biggest MMA fight ever, and that they were going to put 100,000 people in the stands. They expected all of LA's Koreatown to show up for Big Head, and all of the WWE fans to show up for me. I didn't want to hear the hype. I wanted to get started with my new career, and while I'm making sweet dough because of my contract with K1, I knew I'd be spending my best fighting years dealing with delays and bullshit games. I simply wanted to train, fight, and make money. I don't want to have to worry about all this stuff the promotion is supposed to take care of. That's their job. I know I'll live up to my end. You live up to yours. Unfortunately, I never got the chance to knock Big Head out because someone else beat me to it. About a month before our fight, the idiot did a K1 kickboxing match in Japan, took a big shot to his big head, and went down like a felled tree. Scheduling him for an event so close to our fight was just plain stupid of K1. When Hung Man Choi did the medical testing right before our fight, the California State Athletic Commission declared him unfit to compete. K1 offered me Min-Soo Kim as a last-minute replacement. He was a South Korean fighter that had won an Olympic silver medal in judo. I didn't care who he was or what he had won. I knew I was going to steamroll right over him. I have to give it to K1. They probably put 50,000 or so people into the Coliseum on a beautiful June evening to watch me beat up Min-Soo Kim. They also did their best to create a spectacle, including my grand entrance from the Olympic flame at the top of the stadium. My job to me was easy. Wait for the referee to say, "Fight," and go right after Min-Soo Kim. Poor bastard had no idea what he was in for. I took him right down and pounded him out. The fight lasted 69 seconds, and I walked away without a scratch on me. Better yet, because the fight was delayed several times, each extension of my contract cost K1 more money. All in all, I pocketed over $3 million for about a minute's worth of work in the ring. This is the business for me. Getting Dana White's attention. In WWE, you need to get Vince McMahon's attention. In the UFC, that man is Dana White. I'm no fool. Beating up Min-Soo Kim wasn't going to get me into the UFC. That organization was getting hotter and hotter, and mixed martial arts was finally being taken seriously by the mainstream sports media as a real sport. The last thing they needed was to give their critics ammunition by signing the big bad former WWE Champion who had only had one real fight, and that against a lower-tier opponent. Kurt Angle and a bunch of other pro wrestlers were talking the talk, but no one was backing it up. I wanted to be the #1 mixed martial arts fighter in the world. I wanted to be the champion. I wanted to main event the biggest pay-per-views, be the greatest heavyweight the sport had ever seen. But why would Dana White give a shit about me yet? I was just another guy making a lot of noise. I wanted Dana to see the passion in my eyes. I had David Olson and Brian Stedgman try to set up a meeting with the UFC, but I don't have patience for games and everyone trying to position themselves in a business negotiation. I like to get things done. I spent a good part of the last decade trying to avoid the media, but this was one time when being open to the press would be to my advantage. The UFC had a big fight coming up, with Captain America, Randy Couture, defending his title against Gabriel Gonzaga. What would happen if I just happened to show up? What would the UFC's reaction be if they knew I was coming? I spent $2,400 to get the best tickets for me and my lawyers, and I had them leak to the press that I was going to be at the fight. I also did some radio shows where I let it slip that I would be in Vegas to watch Couture fight Gonzaga. When I showed up for the fight, it was funny because there were a lot of celebrities in the crowd that night, and at one time or another, every one of them was up on the big screen. Actors, basketball players, football players, singers, other fighters. But not me. Not even once. My lawyers bet me that the UFC would not put a camera anywhere near me because I wasn't under contract to them, had just fought for a rival organization, and, most importantly, I was that guy from WWE. We knew the UFC didn't want anything to do with sports entertainment because fans accepted the UFC as the real deal, and there was no reason to toy with that perception. I'm not saying the UFC did anything to make me feel unwelcome. I'm sure they were happy taking my money for the tickets, but they didn't do anything to make me feel welcome either. When the show came to an end, the lights were coming up, the cameras were going down, the fans were leaving the building, and I had to make a quick decision. That's when I said to my lawyers, "Boys, I'm hopping the rail, and no one better try and stop me." Lawyers being lawyers, they just started getting ready for any legal issues that might come about because of my move. Deep down, they loved the fact that their client had such balls. I jumped down to the main floor, pushed my way through the crowd, and walked right past security. When I got near the octagon, I found myself directly behind Dana White, so I tapped him on the shoulder and said we need to talk. I caught him by surprise, but could tell he liked it that I was willing to pull such a move in order to get his attention. We found an empty room in the back of the arena, and Dana sat down with me and my lawyers. I'll give him credit. Dana didn't pull any punches. That's a good thing for a promoter in the real fight business. He came right out with it. What makes you think you can do this, Brock? What makes you think you can be in the UFC with the best fighters in the world? I told Dana, don't look at me like I'm an entertainer thinking he's a real athlete. I am a real athlete, an NCAA Division I heavyweight champion. Pro wrestling just offered me a chance to get out of debt and make a lot of money right out of college. I only had a few minutes to make my case because Dana had to get to the post-fight press conference. I was just as upfront with him as he was with me. I told Dana I don't have the time to work my way up in small organizations fighting tomato cans. Either I can be a champion fighter or I can't. I asked Dana to just give me one chance, with the best part of it being that the UFC couldn't lose in the deal. If I win, the UFC has the golden goose. If I lose, someone else is going to become a star at my expense. Either way, my fight will draw money. MMA fans will pay to see me get my ass kicked. WWE fans will pay to see one of their own take on the best the UFC has to offer. There was no downside to the idea. Dana knew this was a win-win proposition, but he also knew he had to throw me to the wolves. If Dana was going to give a WWE guy a shot without ruining his own credibility, it couldn't look like a work or an easy setup. It had to be against a real opponent. There are no easy fights in the UFC, and Dana wasn't going to offer me one just to build me up. I wasn't looking for any favors either. I wanted to start at the top. Dana had to leave for the press conference, but I wanted an answer. I got the one I was looking for. The UFC was going to give me a shot. At the time, the promotion was looking to do something with its former heavyweight champion Frank Mir, and I was the perfect answer to everyone's problems. Mir had been in a motorcycle accident that derailed his career, and he was in the process of making his comeback. He's a big guy, dangerous on his feet and on the ground. No one could call a fight with Frank Mir a setup. It was a perfect scenario for Dana and the UFC. Either I was going to defeat a former heavyweight champion and launch my own career from the top, or Frank was going to kick my ass and show the world that WWE guys have no business stepping into the octagon. When I got home, I watched some tapes of Frank's past fights, and I figured he had no heart. He had good technical skills, and he was very capable, but like I said, I had the feeling he had no heart. Whether he really did or didn't was of no concern to me. I was getting one chance in the UFC, and I planned to rip out whatever heart Mir had and feed it right back to him. I was going to make a statement. I was going to earn my job with the UFC. I was going to prove to Dana White and the entire world that Brock Lesnar was destined to be the #1 heavyweight in the entire world of mixed martial arts. The fight was set for UFC 81 on February 2, 2008 at the Mandalay Bay Event Center in Las Vegas, Super Bowl weekend. The UFC promoted the fight with everything they had. You couldn't walk down the street without seeing my face on a billboard or poster. I was all over the TV, radio, and the internet. If you didn't know I was fighting that weekend, you just weren't paying attention. It was a smart move on their part, a good investment. The UFC made money on me that day, and I think it's a safe bet to say they have continued to make money on me ever since. But everyone knows what happened. There's a saying about how sooner or later, everyone loses in the UFC. I lost sooner. I took Frank down right away and was pounding him. The crowd was going crazy. The noise was deafening, and I couldn't hear the referee when he pulled me off Frank. For a minute, I thought the fight had been stopped and that I had won. But my hand wasn't getting raised. Instead, I was being led to my corner, and Frank was being given a moment to shake the cobwebs from his scrambled brain. Steve Mazzagatti, who is the worst referee in the history of the sport, said that I had illegally hit Frank in the back of the head when he was down. That was Mazzagatti's reason for standing us up. Frank was given some time to recover, but I immediately took him down again and resumed beating his ass. I had the fight won, but then I made a stupid rookie mistake. I was in too much of a hurry to finish the fight, and I stepped into Frank's legs when he was on the ground. I was trying to get a better position where I could just crack him in the face and knock him out, but I fell right into the same trap I had been trained not to fall for. We must have practiced that scenario about 1,000 times in training. I left myself open, and Frankie Boy rolled me right into the knee bar. I had no choice. Tap out or let him break my leg. I tapped, and I have no one to blame but myself. I know I handed Frank that victory. I gave it to him. He didn't deserve to win. He's not a better fighter than I am. On his best day, he's not half the athlete I am on my worst. I gave him my leg on a silver platter, just handed him that submission. That was my loss, not Frank's win. I screwed up. I was a very lucky man that night, because I impressed enough people, especially Dana White, that I got to keep my job in the UFC. I think I'm the only guy in the history of the company that came in with no experience, got beat in 90 seconds, and was declared a hot prospect when it was over. Still, that loss to Frank Mir chapped my ass real good. I came from piss-poor South Dakota and worked my way to become an NCAA champion, and then undisputed WWE champion. I could have played professional football if I wanted to spend a year in Europe to learn the game. When I'm almost 30, I go into the mixed martial arts game, get a shot in the UFC, beat Frank's ass for a minute and a half, only to hand him a victory? Just thinking about it now gets me pissed off all over again. I absolutely knew in my heart, my mind, and my soul that I'm a better fighter than Frank Mir. Losing to Frank was one of the worst moments of my life because I lost to someone who simply did not deserve to beat me, let alone even be in my octagon. I wanted a rematch. I knew I'd have to work my way through some people to get back to Frank, but I didn't care who they put in front of me. I wanted Frank Mir again, and I wanted him in the worst way. Every thought I had about Frank was consumed with bad intentions. Getting back on the horse. UFC 87 was scheduled for August 9, 2007 at the Target Center in Minneapolis, the UFC's first ever event in the state of Minnesota. I was going to fight in my adopted hometown, a couple of miles away from the U of M campus where I had wrestled for the Gophers. I was originally matched up with UFC Hall of Famer Mark Coleman, who has a strong wrestling background and had had fights all over the world, but he suffered an Achilles tendon injury shortly before the event and had to back out. With Coleman gone, the UFC asked me if I would fight the Texas Crazy Horse, Heath Herring. I didn't even think about it before I said yes. I told Dana when we first met I would fight anyone he wanted to throw at me, and I meant it. I wasn't interested in building a resume littered with easy victories. I came to the UFC to fight, and I was willing to step into the octagon with anyone. Besides, I'm a businessman. There's a little bit of money on the undercard, but there's a whole lot of money at the top. Which one would you go for? My goal was never to be the third match on the card in WWE, and that's an environment in which the winners are predetermined. In the UFC, the outcomes are for real. You pitch your athleticism and desire to succeed and win against the other trained athlete's desire to succeed and win. One man moves on, the other drops down 1 or 2 notches. Keep going up, reach the top, make the money. And like Kurt Hennig taught me, get in to get out. I'm a big money athlete. That's not my ego talking. It's a fact. That's how I view myself. If I thought of myself any differently, I wouldn't be a big money athlete. I'd be some guy imagining what it would be like to be a main eventer. I dream just like everyone else. I also go after my dreams and make them happen in reality. Heath Herring was no slouch. He was a fighter with a tough guy's reputation that he earned by fighting top-level guys like Fedor, Nogueira, Congo, Krokop, Belfort, and Kerr. Heath was 43, 27, and 1 before a fight. That's a lot of experience in the fight game. This was a man who knew his way around every inch of that octagon. For me, it was only my second fight in the UFC. I don't think Heath took me seriously, and that rubbed me the wrong way. He looked at me like I was a greenhorn, a WWE wrestler who didn't belong in the octagon with an experienced veteran like him. He acted as if it was beneath him to fight me, and I was determined to make him eat his own words. I'm sure to his friends and family, Heath is an okay guy, but I just didn't like him. I'm sure that Heath Herring doesn't like me either. After all, I broke his face. I never want to take away any man's ability to earn a living, but I have to admit, I enjoyed that punch. One shot, and Herring was reeling backward, ass end over tea kettle, with a broken orbital bone. If he hadn't been such a tough bastard, the fight would have been stopped right there. But for 3 rounds, no matter how much I beat his ass, he just kept coming back for more. Heath took that beating like a man, and he never even thought about quitting. I have to give him that. He at least earned that much. I won a unanimous decision for my first victory in the UFC. Heath Herring has never fought again. UFC 91. My fight versus Randy Couture. I was told that my next UFC fight was going to be against Czech Congo, the French Muay Thai kickboxer. Congo is one of the best strikers in the game, and I thought I would match up well with him because I could easily take him down and control him on the ground. Then I got the word that Dana White wanted to offer me the opportunity of a lifetime. I wasn't going to fight Czech Congo. I was going to fight Randy Couture for the UFC Heavyweight Championship of the world. Randy is the godfather of MMA, a living, breathing legend who is still one tough old bastard. Randy was upset with the UFC when negotiations for a match with Fedor Emelianenko fell apart, and Randy's people told him he could retire from the UFC while he was still champion, and then go fight for another organization. From what I understand, the whole idea was for Randy to go elsewhere and get a piece of the action and a bigger payday. The UFC and Randy ended up exactly like me and WWE. Everyone was suing everyone else, which means a lot of time and money was being spent, with no return on that investment. The UFC made the decision to create an interim title, which I like to call the fake title, since to win that championship, all you had to do was beat another contender. If you want to rule over a kingdom, you have to dethrone the reigning king. Randy was the king of the heavyweight division, but the UFC had grown tired of waiting for him to defend his crown. So they wised up and decided to take a page right out of Vince McMahon's playbook and turn a bad situation into a moneymaker. The plan was to first settle the lawsuit with Randy. The UFC's lawyers had him up against the cage, because there was no way he was going to be able to jump to another organization while he was still under contract to the UFC. No judge was going to buy the retirement ploy and then allow Randy to come out of retirement just so he could get a piece of his fight with Fedor. As things stood now, Randy was going to defend the title against me. In the meantime, 2 other heavyweights would battle it out for the fake title, the interim title, and then the 2 champions would meet for the undisputed UFC Heavyweight Championship of the world. The decision was an example of marketing genius, a win-win for everybody. Couture settled his lawsuit with the UFC and agreed to defend his title at UFC 91 on November 15, 2008 at the MGM Grand Garden Arena in Las Vegas. I could not ask for a bigger or better opportunity in life. A lot of hardcore UFC fans resented the fact that I was being given a title shot in only my 3rd UFC fight, my 4th MMA fight overall. But my attitude was very simple. Fuck them. Only a fool would turn down a chance to fight Randy Couture for the UFC Heavyweight Championship in Las Vegas. What was I supposed to do? Say, no thank you? Oh gee, Mr. White, I'm not worthy? I need a few more fights before I earn the public's acceptance to become the #1 contender for Randy Couture's heavyweight title? I took the opportunity that was presented to me, and I made the most of it. That's what a fighter does. That's what any businessman would do. Wouldn't you do that for your family? So many guys going into a big fight will screw themselves up in the head by listening to the critics and the so-called experts. Everyone was saying I didn't belong in that fight, that I didn't earn it. Randy has too much experience, I kept hearing. I, meanwhile, have no skills. But I never buy into the hype, the advertising, or the marketing. I ignore it all. When you step into the octagon, hype means nothing. Reputations mean nothing. Nothing else matters but what happens when they lock that cage door. It's just so pure. Two gladiators, one wins, one loses. When the referee instructs the two warriors to fight, the truth about a man is going to be revealed. 20,000 screaming fans, a worldwide pay-per-view audience, everyone watching your every movement, everyone wanting that spotlight to be on them at that moment. If your instinct is to mindfuck yourself, you're only setting yourself up for a loss. You either believe in yourself and your camp and your trainers and who you are and what you can do, or you don't. By the time I was offered the title fight with Randy, I had moved up to Alexandria, Minnesota, which is about 3 hours northwest of Minneapolis. I set up my own training facility, the Death Clutch Gym. I put my old wrestling coach, Marty Morgan, in charge of the camp. Greg Nelson and Eric Paulson came on board as my MMA trainers and worked with me on my submission defense, striking, and general game plan. I was grappling with two-time NCAA Division I champion Cole Conrad and two-time NCAA Division II All-American Chris Tuchscherer. I brought in some other big tough guys, like Kirk Klosowski and Jesse Wallace, so I always had people who could push me harder and harder every day. When I needed work on specific skills, we would hire in the best people available, like seven-time Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu World Champion Rodrigo Comprido Medeiros. I actually like Randy Couture. Well, I like him now. I didn't let his status as a legend get into my head before we stepped into the octagon with each other. Going into that fight, I kept reminding myself of the lesson I had learned against Wes Hand. I didn't want to have any respect for Randy at all. He was in my way, an obstacle to be overcome on my way to the UFC Heavyweight Championship. Randy Couture was preventing me from providing a better life for my family, and that's the only way I wanted to look at him. When you step into the octagon with Randy, you are not just fighting him, you are fighting everything he's accomplished in the sport of mixed martial arts as well. It would be easy for anyone to be intimidated by his past, to be in awe of the fighter standing across the octagon from you. But I knew that as soon as I thought to myself, oh wow, this is Randy Couture, he's this and he's that, I would be done. I would have already lost the fight before it even started. So I told myself, I already know what Randy Couture is. Now I want to figure out what he isn't. That's the big difference between me and all of the guys that he beat. I didn't enter the octagon holding Randy on some pedestal above me. I didn't even look at him as an equal. I looked at him as the guy I was going to beat. In my mind, I had no doubt that I was the better man, the more deserving champion. As I stepped into the octagon that night, the entire arena was booing me with a passion. It reminded me of my days as a heel in WWE. UFC fans did not want to see their hero crushed by a fake WWE professional wrestler. They wanted to see Randy show me that I didn't belong, beat my ass, and ship me back to Vince McMahon's doorstep in a box. From the moment the crowd got their first glimpse of Couture, the chants of "Randy, Randy, Randy" filled the arena. As much as the crowd was booing me, they were cheering for Randy Couture. I was loving every moment of it. I knew I was going to win. My training peaked just at the right time. My confidence was at an all-time high. I looked across the octagon, and all I saw was the person I was going to smash and beat for the heavyweight title. I was minutes away from being able to afford the best life possible for my family. During the first round, I listened to my trainer's advice and just tried to feel Randy out. Could I get him up against the cage? Could I maneuver him? Was he leaving me any openings? As I was feeling Randy out, he went to his old bread and butter and tried to stand me up against the cage, where he could use his dirty boxing against me. But I saw it coming, shot on him, and took him to the ground, where I was able to control him. All three judges had me winning that round on their scorecards. I came out for the second round and caught Randy with a right hand, but he countered and caught me with a right of his own that opened up a cut above my eye. Randy saw the blood and thought he had me rocked, and he came in to finish the job. That's when I unloaded on him. I caught him right on the temple with a solid shot, and he went down. The moment Randy collapsed, I jumped right on him. I knew this was my chance to finish him off, and I wasn't going to let up until the referee, Mario Yamasaki, pulled me off and declared me the winner. I pummeled Couture unmercifully. It was just like going hunting. I was never going to give him a chance to escape. I just kept throwing my hands down on him as hard as I could. I could taste the victory. I could feel the victory was just moments away. And that's when Yamasaki stopped the fight and declared Couture unable to intelligently defend himself from my attack. The legend had been defeated. I was the UFC Heavyweight Champion of the world. Beating Randy Couture for the title was a great moment for me, but in the back of my head, all I could think of was getting my hands on Frank Mir again. As much as winning the title was the greatest professional moment I had experienced, losing that first UFC fight to Frank was still bothering me. Meanwhile, the UFC was still going to crown an interim heavyweight champion, and that guy was going to face me for the undisputed title. I have to hand it to Dana White and UFC matchmaker Joe Silva, because they really knew what they were doing. The interim title fight was going to be between Antonio Minotauro Nogueira and, you guessed it, my old pal Frank Mir. I really wanted to fight Big Nog because he looked like the kind of fighter I would enjoy getting into the octagon against. He's just an old-school fighter who enjoyed the battleground, the same type of warrior mindset possessed by Randy Couture. But as much as I wanted to test my skills against Big Nog, I wanted to beat the shit out of Frank Mir even more. I needed to redeem myself against Frank. That loss to him was painful to me. When Big Nog and Frank squared off, I was right in the front row, and I was cheering for Frank all the way. From the first moment of the fight, I could tell Nogueira was sick. He should have been in bed, not in the octagon. I'm not talking about the guy having a cold or the sniffles or something. He was really ill. What none of us knew at the time is that Nog had just battled a staph infection. When he got into the octagon against Frank, he wasn't 100%. He wasn't even 50%. His reflexes weren't there, his reaction time was slowed, and he made Frank look like Muhammad Ali. Frank Mir, the man who was born with a golden horseshoe up his ass, was once again handed a victory. He stood in the octagon against someone who was much more of a man, much more of a fighter than he could ever hope to be, and he got an easy knockout because his opponent had no business competing that night. Frankie Boy was crowned the UFC Interim Heavyweight Champion, and he should have retired on the spot, because his next step was to go up against me. The UFC put the camera on me at ringside to get my reaction. I just smiled and told the crowd that Frank had just given me an early Christmas present. I don't know if Frank really, truly believed in his heart that he was going to be able to handle me the second time around, but I knew for an absolute certainty that I was going to beat that piece of shit and get my redemption and become the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. My fight with Frank was scheduled for a few months down the road, but he had to postpone it due to a training injury. That turned out to be another lucky break for Frank, because he got to fight me for the undisputed title in the main event of the biggest mixed martial arts show of all time, UFC 100. My revenge against Frank Mir. UFC 100 was scheduled for July 11, 2009 at the Mandalay Bay Event Center in Las Vegas, and my fight with Frank Mir for the undisputed title was the main event. I kept dreaming about what was going to happen in that fight, and I knew I was going to pull that golden horseshoe right out of Frank's ass and beat him over the head with it. Frank went around bragging about how he had beaten me, which was one thing, but now he was walking around like it was a foregone conclusion that he was going to beat me again, and that he was already a champion. What a lying sack of shit. He's walking around with a fake title belt, and he thinks it carries the same meaning as the real title? Frank may have been lucky to get a fight with Big Nog for the fake title when Nog was sick as hell, but Frank would never have gotten past Couture like I did. Frank was talking about how my punches felt like ones his little sister would land after jumping on his back when they were kids. Really? I had made hamburger meat out of his face during the 85 seconds I dominated our first fight, and now he's going to talk about me like I'm some bum? Frank was so arrogant, and it made me just want to punch him in the face so hard that I'd knock his head clean off his shoulders. Even now, just thinking about him makes me want to beat up Frank Mir again, and again, and again. When I had to do the photo shoot with Frank for the very first UFC magazine, I kept looking at him and asking myself, how could I have given this guy, of all guys, a win? How could I let someone like that get their hand raised against me? As soon as we started training camp, we put the pieces together on what it would take to beat Frank. It was easy to come up with a game plan because I knew in my mind that I had him beat the first time. I just had to control Frank, and it was obvious to me and my trainers that if I just got my hands on him, I could control him easily. I wanted this fight bad, not just because I wanted to become the undisputed heavyweight champion, but because I wanted the satisfaction of kicking Frank's ass. I wanted to beat him at his own game. I hated the fact that Frank was running his big fat mouth about how he was a great jiu-jitsu expert, and about how he showed me the difference between jiu-jitsu and wrestling. Blah, blah, blah. Frank claimed he was this great jiu-jitsu black belt. What a crock of shit. Hey, let's face facts. When it comes to jiu-jitsu, the truth is that a black belt doesn't mean a damn thing to me. Black belt fucking schmack belt. I'm a white belt, but I beat a black belt at his own game. Shouldn't that make me a black belt? Frank submitted me because I made a stupid mistake, and all of a sudden he's the world's greatest submission artist. Sorry everyone, but guys like Frank get awarded black belts based on how many hours they spend in the dojo. The belts come from the guy's own instructors. They don't have to beat anyone in a real fight in order to win them. My coach didn't give me the NCAA Division I heavyweight title. I earned it. My training staff didn't award me the UFC championship either. I earned both by kicking someone's ass for the honors of being champion. I deserve to be recognized as the best by beating someone man-to-man in the spirit of competition. Frank got his black belt because he paid the instructor a lot of money over the years and put in his time. Big fucking deal. A lot of people talk about how I turned my back on Frank after the referee gave us our instructions in the middle of the octagon. I guess we were supposed to touch gloves. I wasn't in the mood to touch gloves with Frank Mir. I had no desire to be respectful toward him. Fuck him. After all the shit he said about me, it was time for him to back it up. Hey, I said a lot of shit about him too, and I was ready to back it up the moment the referee said it was legal for me to do so. While we're on the subject of touching gloves and all that pageantry, let's get something straight. There are a lot of rules and regulations in the UFC, but touching gloves is not one of them. No state athletic commission mandates that fighters must touch gloves before they fight. So in my mind, I'm not obligated to touch gloves or have a lick of respect for my opponent, either before or after a fight. That whole thing about let's be good sportsmen is all bullshit anyway. You want me to touch gloves with someone like Frank Mir? Then make it part of the rules. Force me to do it. I told Dana White from the day I jumped that rail at the Couture versus Gonzaga fight, either I'm good at this or I'm not. That's all I offered the UFC. I didn't say, hey, I'll touch gloves with a piece of shit like Frank Mir and be all nicey nice to everyone. That's not me, and that's not what I promised the UFC when I asked for a chance. I did exactly what I planned on doing in that fight. I took Frank down, controlled him, and hit him in the head repeatedly and with violent intent. I scrambled his fucking brains before the fight was stopped in the second round, and I enjoyed doing it. I wish the referee would have let the fight go on a few seconds longer, so I could have gotten the satisfaction of punching Frank in the face a few more times. That win was very emotional for me. I had waited 17 long months to shut Frank's mouth, and it felt so good when I finally did it. So there I am, in the octagon, pumped full of adrenaline from the fight, crowd screaming, lights and cameras in my face, Frank in the corner with his face all messed up, and Joe Rogan sticks a microphone in front of me and asks, "Hey Brock, how does it feel?" How does it feel? I've been waiting for 17 months to punch this overhyped asshole Frank Mir in the face, use my wrestling skills to control his body, manhandle him like a bitch. I've been waiting 17 months to prove to myself, the public, God, and everyone else who cares or doesn't care that this guy doesn't measure up to Brock Lesnar. I've been waiting 17 months to pull that golden horseshoe out of Frank's ass and beat him over the head with it. That's when it all came out. All of the emotion. All of the pent-up anger. First, I flipped off the audience with both hands because they were still booing me. I didn't even think about it. I just did it. A little WWE left in me? A little bit of the heel wrestler? Maybe. But they were motherfuckering Brock Lesnar. So Brock Lesnar motherfuckered them back. Then, Mir stumbled over to me, and I thought he wanted to go again, so I went nose to nose with him and was about to jack him before I realized that he was just disoriented. I laughed in his face instead. That's when I went on my tirade. I don't know why, but I happened to look down and see the Bud Light logo on the octagon floor, and it set me off. Bud Light was a UFC sponsor, and they had a lot of their people at the fight. But they weren't a Brock Lesnar sponsor, so I said I was going to celebrate by drinking Coors Light, because Bud Light won't pay me anything. I also threw in, I might even get on top of my wife tonight. Hey, Joe Rogan asked me how it feels. Well, Joe, that's how it feels. Dana wasn't happy. UFC owner Lorenzo Fertitta wasn't happy. My lawyers, who had been chased down the hall by Dana and Lorenzo and given a tongue lashing, weren't happy. My own sponsors, sitting a few feet away, weren't happy. Hey, if it matters to you, I was pretty happy. Well, at least I was happy for a little while. What was I supposed to say? Congratulations to Frank Mir for a great fight. Are you kidding me? And besides, there's more to the story. I don't know how much trouble I'm going to cause by revealing any of this, but it's the truth, and that's why I'm telling this story in my book. If anyone has a different version, write your own damn book and tell the world how you see it. About a month before UFC 100, Dana and Lorenzo flew to Minnesota to negotiate a new contract with me. My lawyers and I took them on a quick tour of the Death Clutch gym. Then we went to a local resort to sit down and talk. In addition to the contract, we discussed possible sponsorship ideas, including big ones like Bud Light and Harley-Davidson. I thought the UFC people were going to set something up for me before UFC 100, but we never heard anything about it again. I don't know if I was supposed to be pissed about that, or if it's just one of those things. I'm not the easiest guy in the world to get along with. I'm also not someone who likes to be played, so the Bud Light thing was somewhere in the back of my mind during the fight with Frank Mir. And when I saw that logo on the octagon floor, the trigger was tripped. Hey, I was on top of the world looking down, and when I looked down, I saw that big Bud Light logo. And all that went through my mind was how much money Dana and Lorenzo were making on that sponsorship, and how much I wasn't. Everyone got a taste of Brock Lesnar that night, unfiltered. I said what was on my mind, no script, no bullshit. Some liked what they heard, others didn't. I don't care. Before the press conference that night, Dana took me into a bathroom and let me know what was on his mind. I said later that night that it was a whip the dog session, and believe me, it was. Dana was trying to run a business where we could all make a lot of money together. He explained that pissing off major sponsors was not the way to do it. And just so I'm honest as hell here in my own book about it, let me say that he didn't phrase his explanation too nicely. He was upset with me, and the truth is, he had every right to be. That probably was the quickest trip ever from top of the world to doghouse. By the time we worked our way from the basement of the arena up to the press conference, I had settled down, and the professional side of me took over. Dana and I had found a Bud Light keg at one of the concession stands on the way up, and I picked it up and was going to carry it in on my shoulder. But Dana saw what I was doing and nixed that idea. I still think it would have been pretty funny. Just imagine the press we would have gotten if I had walked into the press conference with a Bud Light keg on my shoulder. My lawyers put a Bud Light bottle in my hand before I walked into the press conference room, and I put it front and center by my microphone when I sat down to face the media. They all got a few good laughs out of that. I also apologized to Bud Light. I told them, I'm not biased. I'll drink any beer. I'll be the first to admit, I was unprofessional that night. But despite all of the fallout from my outburst, I was as happy as I've ever been in my whole life. I had found a career that excited me, but that also allowed me to be with my family. I was married to the woman I loved and knew I'd happily spend the rest of my life with. Reena had just given birth to our son, Turk, a healthy baby boy. I was making millions. I was supporting my family like I always wanted, and there wasn't anything we needed that we didn't have. Life wasn't just good. It was great. This was the greatest time in my life. And then, I almost died. What is wrong with me? Going into UFC 100, I was a grumpy bear with a sore ass. Fight week is miserable because I'm just sitting around waiting to get into a fight with someone. The training is over. The work for the most part is done. I get phone calls from friends asking, "What's up?" Nothing's up. I'm just sitting around waiting to step into a cage in front of millions of people and either kick someone's ass or get embarrassed by my opponent. That's it. The week of a fight is the longest week on the calendar for me. I spend my time trying to think about anything except what's on everyone's mind, the fight. There's nothing left to do except drive yourself crazy waiting for that Saturday night, when you go to the arena and finally get to actually do what you've just spent months and months training for. The hay, as they say, is in the barn. But I have to go to press conferences and talk about the fight. I have to go to weigh-ins and talk about the fight. Reporters ask me the same questions over and over. My face is everywhere. I can't get away from it. Everywhere I look, everyone I talk to, it's always there. I went to the movies 8 times during the week of UFC 100. Matinees, nighttime movies, anything to escape the hype for a couple of hours. It's like the calm before the storm. Marty Morgan is my head trainer because he's been around me for years. Marty understands me, which means he knows when to talk to me about the fight and when to just leave me alone to my own thoughts. He knows when I need to be with my training partners, and he knows when I shouldn't have anyone around me. When another person knows you inside and out like that, he can't be replaced. He's the key, the glue that holds everything together. Thank God my wife was mature enough to understand what I needed to do. She went through the last part of her pregnancy practically alone while I trained. But she understood, and she couldn't have been more supportive. Coming out of UFC 100 was a totally different deal. We were all on an emotional high. Even though I was the happiest I'd ever been, I had to clear my head. I had to get out of fight mode and back into the mindset of just being a husband and being daddy to my kids. That's the part people need to understand. Going into a fight, I'm Brock Lesnar, UFC Champion, professional mixed martial artist, pro fighter. But the minute the main event is over, I only want to spend time with my wife and kids and the rest of my family. As soon as the post-fight press conference for UFC 100 was over, we flew to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and spent a week hiding out in the woods. We went to Yellowstone. I got to know my new son. When we got back to civilization, I got word that Dana wanted me to defend the title against Shane Carwin. I wasn't crazy about giving Shane a title shot because I really didn't think he deserved it. Who has he fought? Who did he beat? Yeah, I suppose the same could have been said about me, and as a matter of fact, it was said about me when I got the call to fight Randy Couture, but there was one big difference. I am a box office draw. Shane Carwin isn't. This is the fight business. The key word there is business. Brock Lesnar versus Randy Couture was a big money fight. Shane Carwin? No one other than the hardcore fans that watch every UFC fight even knew who he was. Plus, the guy doesn't know how to sell a fight. Put a camera in Shane's face, and you get a blank expression and some cliche like, "Brock is big and strong, so I will have to train hard to beat him." That crap doesn't put asses in the seats, and it doesn't sell pay-per-views. I knew I'd have to carry everything if there was going to be any interest in this fight. But I took the fight. Why? Because I've never turned down a fight with anyone the UFC has offered. You want me to fight Shane Carwin? Then I'll fight Shane Carwin. You want me to sell this fight for both of us, since he has no understanding of how to market himself, let alone a title fight? I can do that too. I'll fight Shane Carwin, and I'll defend my title against him the same way I plan on doing with every other top challenger you put against me. But when I started training for the fight with Shane, I could feel that something was wrong. I was exhausted all the time. Tired. Worn out. No energy. There were days when I would get home from training, and I literally could not get off the couch. I'd been battling some stomach problems for a while, but I didn't think too much of them and just went on. That was a big mistake. I should have listened to my body. Now I had a real problem. My health was getting worse by the day, and the fight was getting closer. I had to make a decision. I wanted to be fair to the UFC, because they were already promoting the fight. But I knew there was no way I could continue training camp and be in any kind of shape to fight. Something was wrong with me. Very wrong. I'm not a quitter, so postponing the fight against Shane Carwin was one of the toughest decisions I've ever had to make. I talked it over with my wife, Marty, and my lawyers, and we all agreed I had no choice. I was sick, and I needed to take care of myself. I went to the local doctor and was diagnosed with mononucleosis. It made sense to me at the time. Training camp can wear you down. My immune system was fatigued. I was susceptible to something like mono. It happens to fighters all the time. This time, it was happening to me. More so I thought. I wasn't happy about letting so many people down, and I really wasn't happy about being sick. So I took my family on a trip to Canada. I figured we could spend some time in the wilderness, and I could rest and get healthy again. Not long after we got to western Manitoba, I woke up in the middle of the night with the worst pain I have ever experienced. I never felt like that before. I was sweating buckets, just drenching the sheets, and I was delirious. I didn't even know where I was. I remember seeing Reena looking at me, and then I fell back asleep. The next morning, I didn't have any idea what was wrong with me. I just knew I needed to get to a hospital. Fast. I couldn't stand up on my own. That says something right there, doesn't it? Brock Lesnar, the Ultimate Fighting Champion. You know, baddest dude on the planet. And I couldn't even stand up. Couldn't help myself. Couldn't get from the bed to the car to save my own life. My brother Chad was with us, and he is big enough to carry me to the car. He loaded me in, and we took off like crazy men. But as fast as he was driving, I still felt like punching him in the face because it wasn't fast enough. Poor Chad. He could have put both feet on the gas pedal and redlined the tachometer all the way, and it still wasn't fast enough for me. I was in so much pain, and I wanted help, but we were in the middle of nowhere. It may sound funny to you, but the Manitoba Prairie is at least 2 hours from the nearest cow town. The speedometer is only reading 99 miles per hour, and I'm thinking of how I can fight through the pain and beat up my brother because he's driving at a snail's pace. At least that's how it felt to me. We got to a hospital in a town called Brandon, and they put me on morphine right away. That took care of the immediate pain, but I still didn't know what was wrong with me. After I stabilized a bit, the doctors took an x-ray of my stomach, but that doesn't show tissue and doesn't give you a full view of what's going on. The doctors knew it and wanted to do a CT scan, but they only had one machine at the hospital, and it was broken. They told me it would be fixed at 11 a.m. the following morning. The morphine was giving me a terrible migraine. 8 hours come and go, and they still don't have the CT machine fixed. Talk about being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The worst part about it for me was the total lack of control. You can call it ego or cockiness or arrogance or anything else you want, but I'm used to being in control. Some people were meant to lead, others were meant to follow. I was born to take charge. It's not only what I do, it's who I am. All morphined up in that hospital, I was helpless, and I was hating every second of it. Reena, who unbeknownst to us, was pregnant with my third child, our second son, was sitting next to my hospital bed, watching the hours go by. She had never seen me like this. She was scared, but she was ready to spring into action the moment we made a game plan. More time went by. Still, no new part for the machine. My condition was getting worse. I didn't know if I was dying, but it sure felt like I was. The hospital gave me more morphine and started me on chicken broth. They wanted to get something inside me, some nourishment, but my body rejected the chicken broth and I started throwing up everywhere. I may have been all zoned out on morphine, but I could tell something was seriously wrong with me. When your body can't even handle chicken broth, you're in big trouble. But that was secondary to the fact that I had no clue what was wrong, since they couldn't get a picture of my stomach. The doctor didn't know either. He was waiting on the part for the machine. Time was slipping away, and I was wondering if I would ever make it out of that hospital alive. I put my faith in the doctors at that hospital. I shouldn't have. It almost cost me my career. It almost cost me my life. Another day goes by, and I'm still going downhill. I've been in the hospital all weekend, and they still don't have a CT scan. They keep telling me the part for the machine is coming, and that I just need to wait a little longer. I'm more than a little concerned. How much longer is this going to take? Can we please be a little more precise on "we're waiting on the part"? Or "it'll be here very soon"? What's very soon? How much time do I have until you're going to need to cut me open just to keep me alive? When I told Reena I was going to die waiting for them to fix the CT machine, we both knew what we had to do. I said, "Let's get the hell out of here." She was happy to hear me say this because she was thinking the same thing. I called one of the nurses in and asked for more pain medication. What I didn't tell her is that I needed the pain medication because I was planning to bolt and had a long drive ahead of me. Reena and I intended to get in the car and head for the U.S. border just as fast as we could go so I could get myself into a real hospital. Before we left, however, we needed a plan. Bismarck, North Dakota was the closest U.S. city, so I called Kim Sabat. His son Jesse had been my roommate in Bismarck State College. Kim had dealt with his own health issues over a long period of time, and he assured us that the hospital in Bismarck could take care of me. Destination? Bismarck. Reena wheeled me out of the Canadian hospital, got me into the passenger seat, and we were off. Like Chad, she was only driving 99 miles an hour, which made me batshit crazy. The damn vehicle had a governor on it. It wouldn't go any faster. It is a 4-hour car ride to Bismarck from the Canadian hospital I was in, and the pain on that drive was unbearable. I have a high threshold for pain, higher than most guys, and I couldn't deal with it. It felt like I had taken a shotgun blast to the stomach, and then someone poured in some salt and Tabasco and stirred it all up with a nasty pitchfork. Of course, the way my luck was going, we ran into problems at the border. When things go bad, they go all the way bad. Reena and I got to the customs station, and the guy in the booth starts to give us a hard time. He's asking all these questions. How long have you been in Canada? Are you bringing anything back with you? What was the purpose of your stay? I'm sitting there, looking like death, and this guy is asking me stupid questions. If I'd been healthy enough, I would have been tempted to break him in half. But I wasn't healthy at all, which should have been obvious to him. So I said as calmly as I could, "I'm really sick and I need some American health care. We're headed to a hospital in Bismarck and we need to get there quick." After looking at me a little closer, he understood that I was serious, stopped hassling us, and let us go. Here's a good laugh for everyone. I've spent so much time avoiding the spotlight, not wanting the celebrity treatment. The one time in my life I really need that VIP status, I didn't get it at all. I guess that border guard was not a big WWE or UFC fan. Scratch him off my Christmas list. Reena got me to Bismarck, and we could tell the people in the hospital were on point. Within 20 minutes, I was already getting a CT scan. A few minutes later, the doctors diagnosed me with diverticulitis. I was told I had a hole in my stomach. I was being poisoned from the inside with my own body waste. No wonder I felt like death. The Bismarck doctors knew who I was and what I did for a living. That means they knew that cutting me open would end my career, and they did not want to do that if it could be avoided. The doctors made a decision. They said I had 8 hours. If the medication appeared to be working on the infection, they would give me some more time. If it wasn't working, they would be forced to recommend immediate surgery to remove a large chunk of my colon. I spent the next 7 hours in the hospital with a 104.3-degree fever. The doctors started discussing the surgery. It was becoming a life or death situation. With 30 minutes left to go, my fever finally broke. I didn't have to have the radical surgery. My career got a reprieve. If the doctor who made the decision to wait hadn't been on duty that day when I arrived, I'd be using a colostomy bag right now. He made a brilliant decision. He and his 28 years of GI experience saved my life. He more than saved my career. He gave me a chance to have a good life with my wife and children. I'll never forget that. Thank you, Dr. Bruderer. I will forever remember you for what you did for me and my family. Although I had avoided immediate surgery, it didn't change the fact that I still had a hole in my stomach and that it was slowly killing me. I was dying. I spent the next 11 days in the hospital with no food or liquids. All I had was an IV solution and a ton of pain medication. I was living in a fog. When I looked around, all I saw was my IV tubes and my wife sitting by my bedside. Reena tells me my lawyers are on the phone with her constantly, but I didn't know that. She tells me they had been in touch with Dana White, who offered to have a UFC helicopter take me to the Mayo Clinic. She tells me Marty was on his way. I didn't know that either. How could I know anything? I was so medicated, I couldn't stay awake. And when I was awake, all I could think of was that I was dying. One time when I woke up, I got a hold of my cell phone and I started calling everyone. My managers, attorneys, trainers, you name it. And I fired all of them. If your number was on my cell phone, I either quit working with you or fired you. Once I came to, I put those relationships back together. I was an ornery cuss when I was sick, and every now and then I have a good laugh about what I did for my hospital bed. It's funny, but not a lot of people on the other end of those phone calls have a sense of humor about it, even to this day. Oh well, I hope they get over it somehow. I'll admit, I was in a pretty bad mood and had no idea what I was doing during most of those calls, but everyone got a taste of what happens if they let down Brock Lesnar. Reena just kept telling me to focus on positive thoughts, but while I was there in that hospital bed, I decided to retire. One of the people I called on the phone was Dana White. He's the one guy who laughs about the calls from me when I was in the hospital. That's just Dana's personality. I like that about him, because I'm sure he got an earful from me that week and a half I was laid up. I do remember telling Dana I was retiring. We both laugh about that conversation now. Not so much then, but certainly now. I wanted to live. I wanted to get out of the hospital and be with my family. Everything else was secondary to me. I was going to be a farmer. No kidding. Everyone still asks me if I was scared about losing my UFC career, never having a chance to see my title reign the whole way through. I wasn't that concerned about it, because when I was in that hospital bed, I had already resigned myself to the notion of being Farmer Brock. At the end of my 11-day hospital stay, I was wheeled out to my car because I was too weak to walk. And that's when it really hit me. 4 months ago, I was invincible, and now I'm in a wheelchair. I looked over at Reena, and I said, "The world's baddest man, huh?" And I laughed. Getting home that day was harder for me than being in the hospital. The pain meds were wearing off, and every time I moved, the pain got worse. I felt every bump in the road. But worse than any pain was thinking about the physical condition I was in. I didn't want to look in the mirror because I was afraid I would not recognize the man looking back at me. I knew that I would have to face facts sooner or later. So slowly, I made my way over to the full-length mirror in our bedroom. I stared at my reflection, not believing it was really me, and mumbled, "Oh yeah, I'm the world's baddest man. The Ultimate Fighting Champion." Reena was standing behind me, and I heard her whisper, "You are." I was being sarcastic. She wasn't. It was at that very minute when I turned the corner and decided that I was going to get back on the horse. No more feeling sorry for myself. It was time to take control of everything again. If I was going to retire, I was going to retire on my own terms. not because some stupid fucking illness took me out. A hole in my stomach. I still can't believe it. A couple of weeks later, I went to the Mayo Clinic to get a complete evaluation. It usually takes a lot longer than that to get into the world-famous Mayo, but Dana called my lawyers with some contacts and strings were pulled, so I was moved up on the list. After what seemed like an endless series of tests, the Mayo doctors informed me that my best chance for a full recovery would be to have surgery. They wanted to remove about half of my colon. I wanted to know what my second best chance was, because there is no way I was going to let them cut me up. The doctor said I was out of immediate danger, so we could always do the surgery later. That was good enough for me. I asked if I could exercise, and they told me it would be okay as long as I didn't overexert myself. Of course, that meant I was in the gym the next day, but I was smart. All I did was walk on the treadmill a little bit. It beat the hell out of a wheelchair, and at least I was doing something. You should have seen me. I looked like shit. I kept looking at an old picture of me when I wrestled in college at 260 pounds. I was lean and strong. Looking the way I looked in that picture again became my goal. I had to get back into shape, and that meant a complete lifestyle change. It would defeat the purpose of my recovery to bulk back up and end up with the same holes in my stomach that almost killed me the first time. I don't respect any of my opponents, but I have a lot of respect for diverticulitis. Me and diverticulitis went the distance, and I have no desire for a rematch. I changed my diet completely. More vegetables, less red meat, a whole lot more fiber, nothing processed or preserved. Then I started to do a little more in the gym each day. Cardio, a few light weights, a little more each day. I approached my illness the same way that I approach a fight. I wanted to beat it. I wanted to take my illness down to the mat the same way I took down Frank Mir at UFC 100. I was in the fight of my life, and every day was another round. When I returned to the Mayo Clinic for a checkup in January 2009, they gave me another CT scan. The doctors couldn't believe what they saw. The hole in my stomach had healed on its own. They couldn't believe my stomach could heal without surgery. They called it a miracle. Those aren't my words. They came out of the doctors' mouths. I wish I could express how that news made me feel. I didn't have to have my guts cut open. I didn't have to wear a colostomy bag for the rest of my life. I could play with my kids, be the man that I was, only smarter, better, healthier. I had been given a new lease on life. I was truly a man who had been blessed by God. My wonderful wife showed me, once again, that she was going to stick by me no matter what. I had 2 healthy children and had just learned that a third, my son Duke, was on the way. I was going to fight again, and now that I had a newfound focus, I was determined to come back from my illness better and stronger than ever. Never again would I take the physical gifts God had given me for granted. As much as I couldn't wait to get back into training and return to the octagon, I want everyone to understand one thing. Yes, I wanted to be the greatest heavyweight the sport had ever seen. Yes, I was determined to come back stronger, healthier, more dominant than before. Yes, I wanted to prove to the world I was the greatest UFC champion of all time. But what was most important to me was that I wanted to be a better husband to my wife and a better father for my children. It would be great to be the best UFC fighter ever, but none of that means anything without my family. They are everything to me, and they will always be my first priority. I hate what I went through, but it made me appreciate my family even more. And so, with my family support, I got ready for my comeback. If I could beat diverticulitis, there wasn't a man alive who was going to stand in my way. The long, short road back. UFC wanted me to fight as soon as possible, but that meant waiting until the beginning of the summer. First, they had to crown another interim champion. That decision was made in December, when no one knew if I was ever going to be able to fight again. Dana, Lorenzo, and Joe Silva chose Shane Carwin and the man with the golden horseshoe up his ass, Frank Mir, to fight in New Jersey at UFC 111. If the doctors had to perform the drastic surgery on me, that fight would have been to determine the new UFC Heavyweight Champion. If I could make it back, the Carwin vs. Mir fight would be for the interim championship, and the winner would face me for the real title mid-year. I don't blame UFC for continuing to promote the interim title fight even after I got clearance to return. You never know in the fight game. I could have gone back into training and ended up right back in the hospital. That possibility was always looming. If they pulled the plug on the interim title and I got sick again, UFC would have to start all over, and that's a long time to go without a heavyweight champion. I brought in Luke Richardson, full-time as a strength and condition coach, and he turned out to be one of the most valuable members of my training staff, since his job was to rebuild me into a stronger but healthier athlete. Luke and I had been down this road before, when I was trying out for the NFL after messing up my body in that motorcycle crash. Here we were again, this time fighting back against my own body, which had attacked me from within. Luke put me on a program, and I started to gain lean muscle mass. I was feeling much healthier than before. I would joke around a lot about never eating my veggies before, but diverticulitis changed my outlook on a lot of things, and one of the important changes was that I was now watching everything that went past my lips. I worked hard for a lot of years to build up my body, and I ended up flat on my back, delirious, all drugged up on morphine because I got diverticulitis. When you quickly go from being a 280-pound warrior without a single doubt in your mind to being sick, helpless, and dependent, it better change your outlook or you haven't learned your lesson. I learned mine. I didn't just want to rebound because of my fighting career. My son Turk was getting bigger and stronger every day, and I wanted him and my daughter Maya to grow up with a healthy father they could do things with. Reena was pregnant with Duke. I was motivated for a lot of reasons, but the most important reason I wanted to get back to being the Brock Lesnar that I knew was because my wife and children deserved the best. UFC asked me to attend the Carwin vs. Mir fight so we could promote the title unification fight, which ended up being scheduled for July 3rd in Las Vegas. I knew Dana and Lorenzo were happy, because either Carwin was going to knock Frank out and go 12-0 so they could promote the return of Brock Lesnar against this undefeated knockout king, or Frank Mir would get lucky again and we'd go for 3, the big rubber match between me and Shithead. Dana and Lorenzo couldn't wait. My fight with Couture drew over $4.7 million at the live gate and over 1 million buys on pay-per-view. My rematch with Mir, which had been part of UFC 100, did over $5 million at the gate and scored the biggest buy rate in UFC history. The UFC brass wanted me back fighting in the octagon as soon as possible. Carwin knocked out Frank in the first round, and I can't say I'm surprised. Frank Mir was so obsessed with me, he was like a stalker. Everything in his life revolved around getting back into the octagon with me, and he was looking right past his opponent. You can't do that, especially when you're fighting a guy with heavy hands like Shane Carwin. Dana never told me he was going to call me into the octagon when they were interviewing the winner of the fight, but I knew it was coming. The last time anyone had seen me in UFC was after I beat Frank, and I was giving the crowd the double bird and pissing off the sponsors. I wasn't looking for controversy with Shane Carwin, but I wasn't running from it either. When Carwin said winning the interim championship was this great big achievement, I just told it like it is. It's a fake title, and that's a fake title belt. I actually felt bad for him if that was really the greatest moment in his life. Training for Shane Carwin, we brought in Peter Welch, a famous boxing coach from Boston. Even though I broke Heath Herring's face with one punch and knocked out Randy Couture, I still hadn't learned the core basics in boxing. I wanted to find a grassroots boxing coach to help me learn how to get my feet underneath me. I had this great wrestling base, but how can I use that to my advantage and combine my years of training as a wrestler with something as simple as a new stance so that when I punch, I'm punching from my feet to my hands? I wanted to learn the fundamentals, and Peter was the right guy to teach me these things. Peter brings a lot of energy into everything he does, and that's infectious. He fit right in with my coaching staff. That's another key. All of my trainers have to respect the fact that it's Marty Morgan who calls the shots. I've seen situations with other fighters where there are too many chiefs and not enough Indians. In my camp, Marty's the boss. We do things his way because he knows what he's doing. He proved that to me at the University of Minnesota. Jay Robinson may have technically been the head coach, but Marty was the one who worked hard at developing that bond with me. Today it's no different. I trust Marty because he's earned my trust. Peter Welch was used to running the show, but he adapted very quickly, and he became a huge asset. With my wife pregnant, I knew I could ask for more time before I had to defend my title against Shane Carwin. Hell, I just came off my deathbed. UFC would have granted me any reasonable extension of time I requested, but I wanted to get back into the octagon. It's the old expression about falling off a horse. You have to get right back on that pony and ride until you know you're the master again. I don't know how many more fights I will commit to in my fighting career, but I do know that when my career is over, it will be because I made the decision that my time was up. I'm not going to let fate make that decision for me. I want to see my career through to the end, on my own terms. I felt the same way about Shane Carwin challenging me for my title. I just didn't see him as the guy to end my championship reign. I wasn't working this hard, sacrificing this quality time with my infant son, putting my wife through another pregnancy practically by herself, just to get knocked out by Shane Carwin. We brought in a lot of wrestlers with heavy hands to mimic Carwin, because we knew that he not only had one-punch knockout power, but also was a Division II national champion. I knew my wrestling was superior to his, but those hands were something to deal with. As long as I could avoid Carwin nailing me on the chin, there was nothing to worry about. I was determined not to get hit. Right before the fight, referee Josh Rosenthal had separate talks with both me and Carwin. He told us both, "I think I know how this fight is going to go." He was 100% right. "We have a Division I heavyweight champion against a Division II heavyweight champion," Rosenthal told me. "I think someone's going to get trapped up against the cage in a bad way. This is for the UFC Heavyweight Championship, so I'm going to give both of you a fighter's chance. As long as you can answer my questions and intelligently defend yourself, I'm letting the fight go on." My biggest problem walking into the octagon against Carwin was that I was so determined not to get hit, to avoid getting knocked out, that I stepped into the cage all tensed up. No matter who you are or how tough you think you can be, that's a recipe for disaster. It actually almost cost me the fight. That first round was a real test. Shane Carwin hit me hard, and he had me backpedaling. I had my bell rung, but I stayed calm. I don't know how to describe it, but all the time Carwin was pounding on me, it kind of woke me up, made me remember who I am. Was I nervous that Josh Rosenthal was going to stop the fight? Yes, I was. I was answering him, but I was also defending myself and watching for an opening to get out of the predicament. I couldn't hear my corner, and that's when a fighter finds out how much heart he has. All the training, all the trainers, all the sparring partners, all the sparring matches, none of it matters unless you have the heart of a champion. When you have a big, strong athlete like Shane Carwin doing everything he can to knock you out, you can either fold under the pressure or weather the storm. With every punch he threw, I could tell Carwin was shooting his wad. Each punch was a little lighter than the previous one. In many ways, that first round was exactly like my battle with diverticulitis. I just had to persevere. I was very fortunate that the fight wasn't stopped. I don't think it should have been, but there have been bad decisions made before. When Carwin exhausted himself throwing punches one after another at me, I knew it was time to scramble. I made my move and got him up against the fence. I just wanted to survive that first round. It would sum up what I'd been through the past 8 months. I'd be able to get back to my corner and regroup. But it would also destroy Carwin's confidence. He hit me with everything he had and couldn't put me away. I could feel him breathing as I just pinned him up against the cage. He was done. No one had ever survived the first round with this guy, and I not only accomplished that, but I took everything he had and was still up on my feet, controlling him as the round ended. As soon as I got back to my corner, Marty was telling me, "This guy is exhausted. He's finished. Put him away." I had just taken a beating, but I felt fine, almost relieved. I was so concerned about getting knocked out after being out of the octagon for a year, and now I knew there was no way my opponent was going to even look into a knockout. There are two words that just don't go together in the English language: tired and dangerous. Shane Carwin was tired. When we got up off our stools for the second round, I knew his ass was mine. 2 minutes into the second round, it was all over. I got a takedown on Carwin and forced him to tap to a choke. Just like UFC 100 against Frank Mir, it was Comprito who came up with the strategy for how to finish off Carwin. We figured Carwin's camp was going to study whatever tapes they could of me, and there weren't many, because I only had 4 fights in UFC. Carwin was going to be careful about the half crucifix I used against Frank Mir. Comprito thought as soon as I took Carwin down and went for any kind of headlock choke, Carwin would get his arm in there because that's the natural defense to the move. "He's going to want to get his body in toward yours," Comprito kept telling me as we worked on the variation of the choke over and over again in training camp. "But if you spread out and use your wrestling base, you'll submit this guy." When Joe Rogan interviewed me after the fight, I didn't say anything controversial. Like I always do, I spoke from the heart. I am a man blessed by God, I told the world, and I truly felt that way. My wife was ready to give birth to my son, Duke. I had come off my deathbed and defended my title. And I got through that first round beating to tap out Shane Carwin. I was in a great place. What more could I want out of life? Cain Velasquez. Fighting Cain Velasquez so soon after I fought Shane Carwin was a mistake. That's not an excuse for losing. I don't make excuses, but I sure made a mistake. One of the unwritten parts of my deal with Dana White is that I can take off the fall season. I love the fall. It's just a great time to go hunting, do a whole bunch of farming, spend time with your kids outdoors. Before we even got to the press conference after I beat Shane Carwin, I was getting pressured by Dana to defend the title against the #1 contender, Cain Velasquez. At first, I just figured Dana and I were going to butt heads. That doesn't bother me, and I doubt it bothers him. He's the president of UFC, and it's his job to look after UFC's best interests. Sometimes those interests conflict with mine. I knew after fighting Shane Carwin that I was tired, both mentally and physically, and needed a break. Duke Everett Lesnar was born 2 weeks after UFC 116, and I wanted time at home to bond with the little fella. You may not believe this, but I enjoy being Mr. Mom when I'm home with my kids. I have no problem changing diapers or doing anything with or for my children. However, I was informed that the Bush tax cuts were likely to expire at the end of the year, which meant if I fought Cain in 2011 instead of 2010, I'd be costing myself a whole lot of money. I know this is a recurring theme in the book, but to me, this is a business. I am in the business of selling and marketing the commodity known as Brock Lesnar, and a lot of people depend on me making the right decisions so they can feed their families. I have the biggest payroll of any UFC fighter in history, but every dime is accounted for. With me, there's no deadweight, no bullshit expenses. It's first-class people all the way who provide a first-class service. That's a key to the success that has been achieved. Fighting Cain in 2010 was a financial decision. I was ready to take all the heat Dana wanted to pile on me for waiting until 2011. I was ready to get going on my farm in Canada. As soon as I choked out Carwin, I was headed home, thinking about seeing my wife, playing with my children, seeing the birth of my son, and then doing nothing but driving my combine. That's me, folks. That's what I like to do. After having the economics explained to me, I made a business decision. I agreed to fight Cain Velasquez in the calendar year 2010. Dana wanted me to fight in September, which was insane. I agreed to fight in October, and UFC quickly booked a Honda Center in Anaheim to capitalize on the Hispanic market. The fight would be sold on Brock Lesnar's drawing ability and a major marketing campaign to the Latino crowd about the first Mexican-American to go after a World Heavyweight Championship in a legitimate fighting sport. We brought in Pat Barry because Pat is a heavyweight kickboxer and has great hands. He was a very positive addition to our camp. We were building one hell of a heavyweight roster over at the Death Clutch gym. I was working out with Cole Conrad, who, by the way, just won the Bellator Heavyweight Championship, Chris Tuchscherer, undefeated John Madsen, who I wrestled way back in high school, Kirk, who has been with me since almost the beginning. Now we add Pat to the mix, and we have a well-rounded camp filled with hungry guys with the goal of making me the best UFC heavyweight champion in history. So, what went wrong? Without offering anything up as an excuse, there are a lot of reasons why fighting Kane at UFC 121 was a bad decision on my part. I'm human. Yeah, I know, I'm not supposed to be, but I am. I'd been through a lot. Some would even say enough in the year before the Kane fight. I got sick, then worse. Then ended up in the hospital for 11 days with no food or water, being fed intravenously. Lost 42 pounds. Had my whole life on hold. Found out my wife was pregnant with another baby boy on the way. Got cleared, did a mini camp, tried to be there for my wife and Maya and Turk, but was all wrapped up in getting back into shape and getting ready for the Carwin fight. Did a full-fledged training camp, then fought Carwin. After that, some downtime was overdue. But I kept going. Our son Duke is born. I have to tend to our farm in Canada, but something had to give. I am not a multitasker. I am a driven, focused individual. I had too much going on, and had been through too much for the entire year. Hey, this is no boo-hoo. Cain Velasquez kicked my ass. The reason why he kicked my ass? Because on that night, in that arena, he was a better fighter than I was. He was ready, and I had peaked 2 weeks early. I even took a week off from training camp because I knew I had peaked. Fighting Cain, when I did, was the stupidest decision I've made in a long time. It would have been a brilliant move if I won, right? But I didn't win. I lost. I'll give Cain a lot of credit. He was ready for my takedown, and his defense neutralized my offense. Congratulations to him. Now comes the part where I have to make a decision about what I'm going to do next, because there are a lot of options for me right now, and I'm weighing them all. Whatever I do, you can count on me doing it in the biggest way possible. As for all the stories that will happen behind the scenes and getting to the big event, whichever event that may be, well, I guess you'll have to wait for Death Clutch Part 2. What? A cliffhanger to end the book? A sequel in the works? Hey, I told you throughout this book, it's all business to me.
All right. That is the end of Death Clutch, my story of determination. Domination and Survival by Brock Lesnar Part 2. We are talking about the book here of the story of Brock Lesnar. And that's the end that he talked about. This was in 2011 around his UFC run. I thank you all guys for coming out on both channels, Toxic Ring Scandal, aka KDH, and the Red Carpet Reign. Much appreciated. Soon to be able to pop up. You guys click the links below. You guys already know what it is at this point, guys. It is OUT.
Something happened this weekend, and I have been struggling with it since I retired. But this weekend gave me closure.
Wow.
It really did. Like, it was fun. Obviously, it was fun. I mean, you can't, doing this for as long as I have and being involved.